This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by OWC, Isotope, Atom Audio, Lafayette, and Spectra 1964. In fact, you're hearing my voice right now on the Lafayette Pure Tube microphone through the Spectra 1964 STX110D mic pre and C610 comp limiter with Isotope, RX, Ozone, and Neutron, all recorded safely onto an OWC SSD and mixed on Atom Audio monitors. Please check out our awesome sponsors using the link in the show notes below. It's a great way to help support this show. Now get ready to rock.
You need to put yourself in a situation where you can get lucky. If you're in a town that doesn't have a music scene, go to a different town. If you're in a town that has a music scene, put yourself out there. It's about putting yourself in a situation where lightning can strike and you can be lucky. And if you follow all three, so be good at what you do, treat people well, and put yourself in a situation where you can get lucky, there is no way in hell that you're going to fail.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. My studio is proudly powered by OWC, and I love how it's improved my workflow. OWC can connect all your audio work drives, trackballs, mix controllers, MIDI keyboards, audio interfaces, displays, or cameras so that you can work fast and focus on making your best record ever. Go look at the Mini Stack STX, Thunderbay 4, or Gemini Thunderbolt 3 dock at maxsales.com/rockstars to find the perfect solution for your studio from OWC. Are you recording your own music or other people's music in your studio, but you're having trouble figuring out how to get your mixes to sound great? Do they sound kind of weak or distant or lack punch and clarity? Well, I've got a gift to help you take your mixes from sounding like basement demos to sounding much closer to professional mixes. And it's my free course called Mix Master Bundle. This course will show you how to get pro-sounding mixes from your home studio with free and stock plugins in Pro Tools, and the best part is that these mixing techniques work for you in any DAW, whether you're on Logic, Cubase, Studio One, Reaper, anything you can think of. If you're ready now to make your best record ever, then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now, and you can find the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. Howdy Rockstars, it's your host, Lid Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Jacob Light, a musician, record producer, and audio engineer based in the San Francisco Bay Area. He's been playing, writing, performing, and recording music with bands and solo artists on stage and in the studio for 25 years. He's been credited on hundreds of commercial recordings for his work as a producer, engineer, guitarist, bassist, vocalist, songwriter, and arranger. Jacob is the founder, owner, and musical director and head engineer of ModernTone, a full-service recording studio and music education facility in Lafayette, California. Jacob runs the studio with his team of pro session musicians, producers, audio engineers, and educators. Together, they cater to recording artists, bands, aspiring musicians, and music students of all ages and levels. Driven by their love of music, they aim to provide professional instruction, guidance, and support that empower people to realize and fulfill their potential and achieve their musical dreams. That's a good plan. I like that. I met with Jacob at NAMM 2022, and we got to hang out by the poolside bar and talk studio stuff. It was really a blast to just shoot the shit for hours and hang out. He had emailed me originally about the podcast, about how he discovered it. And when he did, it helped him put himself out there through his studio and production by getting over imposter syndrome for himself, not to mention surviving musically and in the recording studio through those critical years of 2020 to 2022. So if you don't mind, I'm actually going to read a little bit of the email you sent me because it was just so great. It goes like this. It said, "Hey, Lidge, my name is Jacob, and I'm a studio owner, producer, and lifelong working musician. A couple of years ago, I discovered Recording Studio Rockstars and immediately fell in love with the show. That's awesome. Listening to your guests, some of whom I work with on a regular basis, talk about their struggles and failures changed something inside me. I've been a professional musician for 25 years. I'm classically trained, educated, and highly experienced. Despite all that, I felt extremely self-conscious about putting myself and my name out there. I grew up in Israel, where I maintained a successful music career. At age 27, I realized the only way for me to grow professionally was to leave Tel Aviv. 2 years later, I found myself in California starting my music career from scratch. Being an immigrant, I felt like my track record and credits were not good enough. I figured that I just, quote, hide myself and focus on marketing the studio and my staff instead. 5 years later, inspired by your podcast, I decided to get over myself and finally put my name out there. I'd love to buy you a cup of coffee when I see you sometime at NAMM. So that's what we did, Rockstars. Really, really cool to connect with Jacob. So please welcome Jacob Light to Recording Studio Rockstars. Jacob, are you ready to rock, my friend?
I'm ready, Lids. Let's rock.
Awesome, dude. Glad to have you here, man. It's so nice of you to send that email in the first place. And it's just, it warms my heart to hear stories like that, where this podcast and all these conversations that I've been so privileged to have with people like yourself are helping people who are listening to the show.
I'm sure I speak for all rockstars when I say thank you, man. Like this has been amazing. Like your work is fantastic. Please never stop.
Well, thanks, man. I appreciate that. Of course, my work is just your work, because I convince you to come get on this interview with me, and then I'm just going to make you talk for 2 hours.
Let's do it.
So tell us a little bit about yourself. It's such a cool story. I mean, moving across the world like that to start in music, start a studio, in your case, feel like you're starting all over again, having already, completely established yourself and on a certain level figured it all out, So give us the brief overview arc of your story. How'd you go from getting into music to doing what you did in Tel Aviv to coming to California? And then, of course, we want to hear that part about the podcast again when you get there.
Yeah, for sure. I'll be sure to plug that in. Music and recording started for me at the same time, around age 11. I started playing guitar. It's something I always wanted to do, and I was immediately hooked. Like you couldn't separate me from my guitar. It was just, I was head over heels in love with it.
Is that your guitar attached to your body right now in this video? I can see it.
We're actually been separated surgically, nice. But I do have like 15 guitars sitting 2 feet away from me. So, have
you ever slept with your guitar?
I have.
I've done that too.
Yeah, it's a thing.
You just you just hug it and go to sleep.
Yeah, multiple times. I had a flight once with a Les Paul, a vintage Les Paul that I just bought, and somehow I convinced the crew to give the Les Paul like its own seat without paying extra. And I was just like hugging my new Les Paul for 8 hours on the plane.
Nice.
But to be honest, I don't usually sleep with my guitars. It's more of a special occasion kind of thing,
I don't either. So I think I did it. It's one of those things you try once, you're like, then you can say you did it. You're so dedicated to music and guitar that you fall asleep next to it.
It's a rite of passage. So anyway, I was completely hooked, sleeping with my guitar and whatnot. And then, like I said, at the same time, I kind of found recording because I was always kind of drawn to both music and technology. It's a funny story. I was tinkering with my parents' stereo. Again, I was about 11. And I actually plugged in my headphones to the microphone jack. And I could hear it back. I could hear the microphone, and like a light bulb went out, and that was the end of it. I just figured out that I can bounce tracks back and forth on the dual the dual cassette, and it just started making silly records at home. It was
so you had plugged you plugged the
headphones
into the microphone jack, or the microphone into the headphone jack.
So the headphones to the microphone jack.
Yeah.
And that immediately turned it into a microphone. There was a little built-in kind of blend knob.
Right.
And
so you could hear your voice.
Right, I could speak through
Gotcha.
it. Right.
I was trying to picture you plugging your headphones into the microphone jack, which would also work, but I don't think it would make your microphone all that happy. I probably tried that once.
Probably, yeah. I agree that the other way around is preferable. But I was like, hey, I've got a studio at home, so I spent, days, making silly records with my friends. But it's like ever since I can remember, I wanted to play guitar, start a band, and record music. Like that was always.
I was just going to say, let's break that down for a sec for the rock stars who are listening. They're like, you did what? So explain why it is that you can plug headphones into a microphone jack and that works.
Well, headphones, basically you use a very similar membrane, right? So as soon as you plug it into a headphone jack, assuming with some kind of a built-in preamp, it acts as a microphone, right? Like you can speak to it in the same way that you can play music back.
Yeah. So because a dynamic microphone is a moving coil, it's a diaphragm. The sound waves hit the diaphragm, they move it back and forth. The coil generates electrical current, which comes out the wire in the other end, and that's your mic signal for a dynamic mic. And then headphones are usually that in reverse. It's right. The electricity comes up the wire, hits the coil, goes out the diaphragm into your ear, and voila, you're listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. You
did a much better job explaining it. There's actually a really famous studio trick where people used to do it tons in the 90s, where you take an old an Sten woofer and wire it in reverse to make it into a sub-kick microphone. I've done a bunch of those. So even speakers work like that, right? It's not just the headphones kind of thing.
Yeah, that makes a really cool mic. In fact, if you've got old speakers lying around, Rockstars, I highly recommend you experiment with hooking wires to it and see if you can see if they become cool mics in your studio just for like funky, weird sounds.
Absolutely, man. Anyway, long story short, I never stopped doing either. So I started a band at 13 and kind of ran with it and got into better bands and got into more bands. And then at the same time, kind of, got more like deeper into recording, got my first Pro Tools rig when I was 15. And, never stopped. I spent my 20s being both in bands and being kind of a hired gun guitarist. And I would spend my days either gigging or teaching or, working on material or being in the studio producing bands or getting my bands produced. It was, And it's one of those situations, you were talking about Tel Aviv, those situations when I know all the venue owners, I know all the front of house guys, I know all the guitar techs, I know all, you just know everyone and everyone knows you. And it's really convenient, right? Like sometimes I would gig 3 times a day. I do a corporate gig. I do a corporate gig, in the morning. I do like an afternoon kind of reception or something like that, and then gig with my band at night. And I'd have like multiple rigs kind of spread out. So it was awesome. But at the same time, I felt like, so I guess the biggest catalyst was when in 2010, a band I was in. It was interesting. I was originally a hired gun, and then I kind of became part of the band. We got an opportunity to record a record in upstate New York with an amazing producer named John Aclario at Nada Recording Studio. He did My Chemical Romance and a bunch of other stuff. Speaking of which, you have to have him on the podcast. He's an amazing, amazing producer. Cool. Anyway, we spend about a month with John in the studio. And, I've been to the US multiple times before, but I've never spend, a month or 5 weeks or however long it was living there. And when I got back, I was like, okay, like I know where my career is going. This is scary. This is really scary. Like this kind of new, this, I feel like it was like a bug that I saw. I got all of a sudden. And I realized, if I want to take my music to the next level, if my career is going where I want it to go, I have to leave.
Yeah. Wow. So you just felt like, I guess that makes sense. On the one hand, it's like you've got everything dialed in where you were living and you had a whole system in place for being able to make music, play music, produce stuff, do things. And but maybe you felt like you had like filled the bucket or something, and you were ready for this whole new world of opportunities.
It was exactly like that. And on top of, I think that another thing I saw is like, oh wow, these guys are playing ball at a whole other level. Like this is, I'm doing this, like no matter what it takes. And it took about a couple of years for me to figure it out. But my wife and I, finally moved to the Bay Area. We had a couple of cats, a couple of Les Pauls, a bunch of pedals and 4 suitcases. And that was it. Nice. And we were like, okay, I'm starting from scratch. Day one.
That's great. 2 cats, two guitars, 4 suitcases.
Pretty much.
Well, very cool. So what was it, when you first arrived here, tell us a little bit more about that. Was it kind of scary to do the new location? At this point you had probably already been, kind of filled with a lot of enthusiasm from your experience. And you probably had a sense that things were, the potential was there to move here. Did you come do a visit first beyond the New York record? Did you like go to San Francisco and scope it out and meet people or anything, or did you just dive in with 2 feet?
A little bit of both. So I've been to the US multiple times. For a variety of reasons. So I knew a little bit about it. I've been to the Bay Area just once before, about a year before that. But I had a really cool opportunity. I was working part-time as a journalist in a tech publication. And through them, I had this opportunity of going to the Bay Area and kind of trying to get cool stories from, all the tech companies around here. And I was like, I'm jumping on this opportunity. This is super cool. I'm going to get to meet a bunch of people. And it's going to help. It's going to soften the landing a little bit, because it's not like, you land and, okay, now I'm going to be a full-time musician and make a living and support my family, So that helped a little bit. But no, there wasn't a lot of scoping. It was just like, hey, I've got this opportunity. And like you said, I was full of enthusiasm. I knew that I was good. Like I've already made it once, so there's no reason to assume that I'm not going to be able to make it again. And I was just very hardworking, humble, and just I just did my best. I started going to shows. I started teaching, which was really fun, and I went to tons of auditions, basically.
Yeah, that's smart. I mean, the teaching gig is such a great way to get started with things, because if you think about it, in order to teach, it's all about you and your experience that you carry with you. And as far as gear, you probably just need your guitar,
And an amp and a couple of pedals.
Yeah, but I mean, like, as opposed to like when you're starting the whole studio thing, it feels like it might feel like a whole lot more that you have to assemble.
Sure.
So it's smart. I think it's smart to, at the beginning, at the onset of doing this stuff, lean on the skills that we've got that are easiest to start making an income with too.
Right. And not to say that it wasn't smart, but it was also kind of a labor of love. Like, it's something that I was always drawn to and something that I genuinely love to do. Kind of like we're talking now. That's how lessons feel for me. Like, oh, you're gonna sit with me for an hour and just let me talk guitar and show you cool stuff. Let's do it.
Yeah.
So it was just like a no-brainer for me.
I might have to sign up for a guitar lesson with you soon, man.
I'm
playing a ton more.
But I mean, come on by, man.
Right on. Okay, well, so let's see. So you were there, you're teaching. When did you begin ModernTone?
So I was teaching, and then on top of that, like I said, I went to tons of auditions and did a lot of corporate jobs. Like we were playing in conventions, and I was playing in multiple bands and with production companies, just doing live cover stuff, right? Like I was in like this Motown style band and a dance band, like doing some jazz receptions, just like, just kind of getting to know the scene, local musicians. And I got to just hang out with a lot of session musicians. Mm-hmm. And about a year, 18 months in, I was at capacity. Like, I couldn't take on more gigs. I couldn't take on more students. My wife was pregnant. And I'm like, okay, I got to figure this out. Like, I got to step up my game. And that's where the idea of starting ModernTone first originated. It was, I guess the initial thought was, what am I good at? And what do I want my life? What do I want to do with my life? And how do I put all of that together into one? How do I put all of my loves, I guess, if you will, into one? And that's when ModernTone started. And that's when I realized that there was another advantage into teaching. So because I was teaching, I got to meet all these different people. And among them were business experts and financial experts and lawyers and entrepreneurs. And I got to basically pick their brain for free. I had this money guy who kind of became a friend through lessons. And we bartered lessons with basically business lessons. Like, he helped me develop a business plan. I would come to him with questions. I had a tax guy that I was teaching. Same thing, right? Like, come take lessons. Let's figure out like how taxes work, how employees work. So what's a W-2? And through that, I kind of started building my business brick by brick.
That's so smart. I mean, I've heard alternate versions of that. I've heard of people who would start out in Nashville and they'd get a job in the cartage business.
Mm-hmm.
So cartage are these companies that would store all the guitars and drum sets and, the huge racks of producers' gear. And then they would show up at a session before the session starts and they would drop it all off and set it all up. And then that way the producers and the musicians could just walk right in and do their thing. And, of course, that was like, it was a simple job on the one hand where you're moving stuff around, but it introduced everybody to all these studios. And I love your version of it, which is like, it introduces you to a little bit of everybody, and you can be very selective about like, finding people to give you the kind of advice and help you get started with your idea. I guess another version of that is are people who are really, really good at doing, Uber and Lyft ride sharing and strike up conversations with people and meet people all over town.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that I could not agree more. I guess the only difference would be that teaching can kind of become a very intimate thing. Like you're helping someone like really realize something, like you're opening up things inside them, and the connection is so much more personal. Not to say that you can't get the same thing, with Uber or Cartage or anything like that. But
the Uber reference might be a little whack. I mean, it's not like you're guaranteed to get a call back the next time they need a ride.
Right. But with lessons, you see the same person at the same time every single week.
Yeah,
right? Like you become part of their lives. You hear, like you started the lesson, like the first couple of minutes, we would make coffee and, how was your week? And, oh, my wife and my kids and my this and my that. And like, oh yeah, what was your gig? And you just kind of you become friends. It's you bond over this love of music. So
that's great.
It was an awesome experience. By the way, I still have that. Like I still have friends from 8-9 years ago that I still see. I haven't taught in a while, but I still have dozens and dozens of friends that I made by just teaching.
Atom Audio can provide all your monitor needs. Whether you're setting up a first-time home studio for recording music or podcasts, or a world-class full-size studio for professional mixing and mastering in stereo or immersive sound. Featuring the XART tweeter and custom DSP onboard processing, the A-series monitors will perfectly adapt to your studio. Get the Atom Audio monitors and subwoofers that are right for you with an extended 5-year warranty at atomaudio.com. It's like my brother in his music school in New York, where now, his ex-students are the one who call him to see if he'll sit in on a gig with them for their band, and they're badasses now.
How awesome is that, man?
Yeah. Well, very cool. So you decided to go for it and start your studio, and your website, I was checking it out. It's a beautiful website. All of your presentation is elegant and really well done, Jacob. So we're going to talk about that stuff too.
Sure.
But, tell us a little bit more about your vision for starting it. Cause the way you described it, you made it sound like you saw an opportunity and a need for a studio before you even dove in. And it looks like you really dove in, like there's construction going on.
Oh, tell me about it, man. I dove in and then some. So it was a combination, like I said, where I needed to, I was getting more work than I can handle. And I realized that in this like little enclave, like this little area where I live in, it's part of the East Bay, in the Bay Area. And there are all these musicians and music enthusiasts, but there really wasn't a studio around here, right? Like the nearest studio was probably in Oakland, which was about 20-25 minutes away if there's no traffic. Or, if you're looking for a bigger studio, probably San Francisco, which can be, 40-45 minutes if there's no traffic, or an hour and a half if there is traffic. So
maybe a little bit, maybe San Francisco would feel like some pretty stiff or steep competition too, and stressful to start a studio right there.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. But I was more talking about it from like the local musician's perspective, where I was getting studios, and I would go to record, and it would be like a whole thing, right? You got to load the car and go to the, figure out traffic, and it would become like a whole day kind of thing. And I realized, wait, like all these people want me to work with them and record them. I need to figure this out. And then at the same time, I realized, if I'm going to build these, soundproof rooms, we can also use them for lessons, because lessons has been going really well, and I love educating, right? So all these different things of, production and recording and teaching and working with session musicians and empowering people, kind of like you said, all came together in my vision for starting ModernTone. On top of that, not to get like too business-like, right? But because I was pouring everything I have and then some into it, I also wanted to diversify. Like one thing that I learned being a lifelong musician is the more you diversify, and the more you kind of working in different aspects of the music industry, the more sustainable your income becomes, right? Like you probably hear these stories every day about musicians who, have like a great couple of months and then 2 or 3 months where it's like, how do I pay rent,
Right.
So that was another aspect of it, right? Like how do I build a business that is sustainable year round and where my income can be relatively steady.
Yeah. Did you come from a savvy business background? Is that something that you feel like you learned through your family and that sort of thing too? Or do you feel like this is a skill set that you really learned just on the path as you were becoming an adult?
Man, I wish. No, I learned everything myself, and if I might add, the hard way.
Mm-hmm.
No, I was definitely not business savvy whatsoever. Having said that, I always had this entrepreneurial spirit, right? Like I was always like kind of like, this is what I want to do, and nothing on earth is going to stop me, right? I was, whether it's like being 13 and starting a band, and I don't care that the drummer's neighbors hate us, like I'm doing this. To what, I have this studio idea, and I don't care how many people tell me I'm crazy. I'm gonna do this one way or another, right? And I learned the business aspects of it along the way.
Yeah, I felt similarly. There was so little I understood about any of that, but I had an ingrained sense of adventure, and entrepreneurial spirit. I guess in terms of, think sort of big in what you want to do and just know that you can go out there and do anything you want. Even though my dad also sort of was encouraging me to, he's like, well, maybe you should go get a job in a studio first, so you can learn how it goes and that kind of stuff. Like he just, parents want their kids to just be okay, so it's a lot of times the advice we get is just like, go get a job and go get a job with a capital J, a job, but I mean, that's not necessarily what we want. And the studio stuff, I remember feeling like, when I looked at my path too, thinking like, well, how did I get here? And one day I was just like, I think I just don't take no for an answer. Like people keep trying to tell me like, no. Life tries to tell me no. Like opportunities like, no way, dude, you're running out of money. You're broke again. How are you going to do that? And then I would just somehow I just wouldn't take no for an answer.
Yeah, this business is like 90% determination, just never give up.
Yeah. So actually we'll come back, but I'm going to leap ahead since you said 90%. There's a great quote that you shared on your website in one of the videos. You were talking about the 10%, 80% rule for musicians. So tell us about that one, because that's another one that's worth paying attention to. Yeah,
it's something that I kind of learned along the way, that being a musician is 10% practice, 10% talent, and 80% crippling self-doubt. It's and it's so true. Like if you really dig deep, like it doesn't matter how many gigs you've done. When you go behind your instrument, you put your instrument on, and it's go time. Like there's always that like, oh, am I gonna bomb this? Is this gonna be like is this gonna be the day where I mess up? And there's all these kind of different forms, but I really think that artists and definitely musicians, have that. It doesn't matter how confident you try to look, we all have that crippling self-doubt, and that's awesome. And about that video that you referenced, what I like to do as a producer is harness it.
Mm-hmm.
Like let's use that self-doubt, let's figure out where it's coming from, and let's put that into recording, right? Let's figure out how to make you honest. How do you use that to make you a more honest person, a more honest storyteller, a more honest musician, instead of trying to hide it and being too cool for school.
Yeah, that's great. That's great advice. So how do you feel like, we all or yourself incorporate that into just the process of starting a studio and running a studio? I mean, I think of self-doubt immediately for every time I listen to the mix back afterwards. You know what I mean? It's like you work so hard in the studio on something and then you go listen to the mix somewhere else. I think of the self-doubt creeping in. Think of all those times you pressed play on a song for other people to listen to, and they're sitting next to you while they listen to your music for the first time. And like the first thing you start doing is making all these excuses for it. Like we all do that. You're like, well, this is just a rough mix, and I hadn't tuned my vocals yet, and
I know what you're talking about, man. All my mixes are perfect from day one. Yeah.
There you go. There you go. Now you're talking my language. You have been listening to the show.
Yeah. Yeah. It's terrifying, man. It's terrifying, but life can be terrifying, right? If you don't take risks, and kind of going back to what we started, right? If you don't put yourself out there, like I learned from Recording Studio Rockstars, you've got very little to gain, right? So putting yourself out there as a person, as an entrepreneur, as a musician, as a studio owner, as anything, is the way, is usually the way to move forward, right? Like growth and comfort can't coexist, right? They just can't, right? If you're uncomfortable, if you're having self-doubt, anxiety, whatever it is that's troubling you, it probably means that you're growing, right? It doesn't guarantee that you'll get it right. In my case, oftentimes it means you'll get it wrong, but it means that you're growing. And failure or bombing is just a way to get better, right? Like I remember the first time I improvised like a guitar solo, and it was awful. I practiced so hard. I went back and practiced so hard because I swore to myself, like, there's no way you're putting yourself in that situation again.
Nice.
So I guess to answer your question, I would harness it and figure out a way to own it, to learn from it, and to grow from it.
Yeah, indeed. I like that part of the lesson there is accepting that we do kind of suck, and taking the challenge to go back and work on what we've got to present and make it better. Instead of, because that whole process of self-critiquing and being sorry for ourselves for, it's like living in that fear does nothing but refuel the fear itself and keep us in a state of angst about what we're creating. When you're absolutely right, putting yourself out there, getting your ass handed to you, even if you're handing it to yourself,
right,
which is like listening to your own mix in the car and going like, that's not good enough, should be seen as an opportunity. Always.
Yeah, absolutely. But
so I just went and checked. I'm going to give a shout out to Patrick Hakes. If you're listening out there, Patrick, he came to, I think he came to the Rockstars of Mixing event. I had the very first one years ago. But when we were listening to mixes, and Patrick, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this was you. We had been listening to each other's mixes, and it was like, you press, again, your mix goes up to the front of the class, press play, and everybody hears it. And he said, have it sitting there while the whole classroom listened to his mix that first time was the worst experience ever. He said it was like having to watch I've said this before on the podcast too. It was like having to watch a stranger kiss his wife in front of the whole room. And I was like, oh man, that is a lyric that needs to go into a song right there.
I'm going to grab a guitar right now.
Yeah, do it. Well, wait, hold up. We got more podcasts to do. All right, cool. So now you talked about finding Recording Studio Rockstars, and you brought up the idea of imposter syndrome. Mm-hmm. What is that? Tell the Rockstars, when you hear the term imposter syndrome, it sounds like kind of a cool heavy metal band name, actually. But what is it? Well,
to me, it means that you have this ongoing condition, like this kind of self-doubt, this chronic state of self-doubt where you're like, oh, I'm not good enough. I'm faking it. I'm not good enough to be X, right? I'm not good enough to be a session guitarist. Like, I'm not good enough to teach. I'm not good enough to produce music. I'm not good enough to work with that band. This constant kind of state of exactly what we talk about, of fear, self-doubt, some anxiety. And I think it's something that most of us share, especially in the beginning, but it's something I think that as humans, we share. Like you talk about those times when you're like, oh man, I'm broke again, right? Like that could really easily fuel imposter syndrome. Like, why am I broke? Am I not good enough? Like what's going on,
Yeah. Or is my whole career choice not good enough?
You question every choice you ever made. I've been there. It's scary, It's scary and but overcoming it is amazing. And again, I'm definitely crediting Recording Studio Rockstars to that, because I remember listening, or when I started to listen, all these guys, like first of all, I realized that a lot of these people, all these guys and girls, are doing pretty much what I'm doing. Like we're doing very similar things, and I would listen to their mix and I'm like, yeah, this kind of sounds like my stuff. And I would listen to, all the times they messed up and did things wrong. Like, hey, I did that. And then I started to hear like familiar names, like people that I work with. And I'm like, wait, so these people are putting themselves out there. They're my peers. Like I know that I work with, like I hire them. They hire me. Like maybe I'm not an imposter. Like maybe, I'm good at what I do. And, I have the receipts to prove it.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And I've certainly heard a ton of that on the show. It's been an honor to hear everybody be so transparent about their process. I remember hearing that also when I was young and just coming up in the studio. I think I was sitting with this great artist, Will Kimbrough, a great guitar player here in Nashville and an artist himself. Now he plays with Emmylou Harris regularly. Nice. So when I was working with him, I'm sitting there and I'm working with him, and he seemed, at that point to me, he was somebody who was like, well, he's clearly successful. He knows what he's doing. He's doing this professionally and everything. And he would talk about going through that self-doubt as a musician and an artist, and then realizing, if I couldn't do this, like what else would I do? This is all I know how to do is play guitar and do these songs and everything. And I was really struck by that, and I appreciated hearing that from somebody else who was, I saw as much further along the path than myself. And then in my own journey, I would come to these points where I'm like, I'm broke again. What am I going to do next? Maybe I should look into some other career. Maybe it's time to go back to school. Maybe it's time to this, time to that. And I found that it was helpful to entertain those, like address them, go like, don't be sorry for yourself. Look into it. Like go think about it, work it out in your mind, work it out on paper, go to the website and research it if you need to. But I'd always come back to the same conclusion is like, what, the more closely I look at it, the more I come to the same conclusion. My best opportunity is to just keep doing what I'm doing and make it work. And at the same time, I'll present this back to you, Jacob. What about those times when you really do need to pivot? What about those times when it's like, dude, you need to wake up to what's not working and look for something that is working?
Then you have to be honest enough with yourself to do it. But one of my you asked me to in the email you sent, you asked me to share an inspirational quote, and this kind of goes not to steal your question, right? But some kind of a mantra that I've always lived by is where there's a will, there's a way, right? Like it's if you want something strongly enough, you'll find a way to do it. And oftentimes it means pivoting. Oftentimes it means, I'll give you an example. So I was on this trajectory where I was a hired gun guitarist. I was a professional guitarist and I was playing gigs a lot. Sometimes like three times a day, a lot. And I realized that it's great. I love it. But like 1,000 shows in, I don't see it, like I don't see myself doing it in 10, 20, 30 years. Like it's not going to be sustainable, physically, emotionally, creatively, financially. And I had to pivot. I put I put so much work and effort and building that. And I realized, this is not the future for me. I thought long and hard about it, and I realized, it's time to pivot. Like I'm going to do more studio work. I'm going to do more educational work. I'm going to do more of that stuff and just put all my energy in that because it was time to pivot. Like the route I was on was just not right for me.
Howdy, rock stars. I've got a secret to tell you about how I get a consistent sound mixing over 1,000 hours of recording studio rock stars. My secret is using iZotope, RX, Ozone, and Neutron on every single episode. Right now, you are hearing RX breath control, declick, declip, DS, Deplosive, voice denoise, ozone multiband compression, neutron EQ, and limiting, all from iZotope. Go to iZotope.com/rockstars and use the secret code ROCK10 to get 10% off. Right. And you were also doing that life shift from, individual who could just hop and go play a gig anywhere at any time to starting a family and needing to have that figure out how to both be rock and roll and, settled in at the same time, which I think we all go through on some level.
It's a balance, man. Yeah, absolutely.
Do you want to share another story? Anything that comes to mind for you that was like a really important failure along the way, or a nightmare in the studio moment? Is there anything that comes to mind once you did start ModernTone where you had to like still pivot, even though you had made this, you'd already like made the biggest leap you could make,
Twice.
Beyond becoming married and a parent?
Oh, and then 3 times.
There you go.
Do I have to choose just one? Jeez.
Yeah, go whatever you got.
So, I'll give you a slight intro about ModernTone. So, ModernTone is we do both recording and production, and we do lessons. So, all these, I've got a team of 9 session musicians that work for me, and they kind of play sessions for me in the morning, and they teach like in the afternoon. So I can get to book them for days at a time. But when I started the studio, I poured a lot of money, time, and effort into it. Like this building is literally drenched in my blood, sweat, and tears. And when I finally opened the door, I missed when I transitioned basically from being a freelance to starting ModernTone, I miscalculated how long it would take for things to really take off, and I found myself in debt, overwhelmed by the overhead. And, I would wake up in the morning and the bills would just keep piling up. And on top of it, kind of like we talked earlier, I had to figure out about 10,000 different things about running a business and being a business owner and all that stuff. And yeah, it was tough. I think that's where imposter syndrome kind of was at its strongest. When I was able to move away from Tel Aviv. I started a new life. Everything was going well, and in my mind, like, why did you have to open this studio? Like everything was going so well. Why not? Keep doing that. But I worked my ass off for 2 years before I started taking days off. I put in 15-hour days, and I did a lot of meditation to help with the anxiety, did a lot of soul searching whenever I could to think about, to try to convince myself that this choice wasn't a whim. It wasn't something that I woke up one day and was like, you know what? I'm going to throw my life savings into a studio. Like, that's cool. It was something that I spent, a couple of years developing, and basically reassuring myself that this was, or I guess questioning and making sure that this was the right decision for me. And through that and through just a lot of hard work and really long days, I pulled myself out of it. When I first took the day off and, I had employees kind of running the studio, and I kick back and had a cocktail with my wife, was the first time where I'm like, okay, like this is, I've arrived. Like I'm over this. I'm over this. Like this is working.
But first, honey, let me just quickly check that everything's okay back in the studio.
Oh, I was saying that as I was checking the security cameras. Like I was checking every 5 minutes. Like, oh, okay, studio's still there. Studio's still there.
You got a cocktail in one hand, the other hand's down below the arm of the couch, checking the video cameras back in the studio. So I can't see.
True story, man. Absolutely.
Oh man.
Monitoring text. Is everything okay?
Well, so let's you probably get lots of chance to talk about failures, but let's pivot a little bit to the model of your studio. So you've done something very unique. You discovered that there was a need locally in the location. You decided, I'm going to go for it. You built a place. So we want to hear briefly, like, what did you decide to build? Like, what did you feel like, okay, this is the right kind of space and enough room for us to do the things we want to do? And then also, you said something, you pointed it out, you kind of glossed over it, but I really want to focus on it. It sounds like you came up with a brilliant model of keeping this, your team of musicians close to the studio by creating multiple ways for them to generate income, which works for the studio, which works for the team members, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was doing in my 20s, I was doing a record with this music producer, and I remember he sent us like an estimate, and I was asking about his hourly rate, and he was like, "Oh, this is what I charge." I think about it as like, how you would pay for a guitar lesson, right? Like that's what a music producer does. And I think I had this little aha moment where I'm like, "Oh, right, that makes sense." A producer in in essence, is kind of like, a music instructor in the sense that he helps shape the band or the song or the recording. So fast forward to ModernTone, I realized that the two are close together. Like there is some kind of a relationship between, being a producer and recording and working with artists to teaching people and helping people grow as musicians. So I was looking for spaces for a few months. I was looking for a dump that I can renovate because I had this idea of building multiple rooms that are soundproof and acoustically treated, and at the same time all wired for recording, so that I can have like this modular space that where if I had a lot of lessons on a given day, I could use all of the rooms for lessons. And then if I had a big band and needed to isolate amps, I could also do that, right? Yeah. So I finally found a place. It was so run down that the landlord was a little bit hesitant about showing it to me. It was a dog grooming place for about 30 years, and it was awful. It was so bad that we found dog hair like in the sockets. It was
wow.
It was.
So did it still kind of smell at that point too? Do you have to deal with all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. Like there was no doubt what was the previous business. But like I said, the idea was to gut it all out. So it took about a year from the moment that I found the place to the moment construction started. But we work with a fantastic construction crew and an architect, and I did a lot of heavy lifting myself, both literally and figuratively. And I designed a space. We have 6 rooms. And for the most part, 3 of them are used for production and recording, and 3 of them are used for teaching. But like I said, the rooms are modular. Everything is wired up for recording. So, sometimes we use 5 rooms for teaching, and I do mixing in my control room. Other times I use 4 rooms to isolate amps and work with live bands. And then we only use 2 rooms for teaching. But I went all out with the soundproofing and, going all out with, we can talk about all day, right? But double studs, double sheetrock, green glue, all that stuff to get to a point where I can have a classical piano lesson next to like a rock band, rocking out. And it was a huge investment, but it paid off because the ability to do that and have those 2 streams kind of work alongside each other, financially speaking, is amazing. But musically speaking, not every time, but really, really often I have an artist coming into the studio and they have, their self-doubt, right? And I'm like, hey, like as we're working through pre-production, how about if you take a couple hours with my vocal coach and like see if you can find some ideas, or maybe try a couple of bass lessons, see if you can, get some fresh ideas, when we're working on arranging these songs. And the other way around, where like I would have more established artists come in and take lessons and kind of graduate into becoming recording artists, right? Like they started as students, but turn into more of the recording side. So the 2 sides of the studio are very symbiotic in that regard. Like they complement each other in more ways than one.
That's very cool. Well, we won't have enough time to go into all the things that make a studio done right.
Sure.
But does anything come to mind as sort of a learning lesson failure in the construction side of studio that you want to share back with the rock stars for advice for anybody who is building a place?
I'm not so much a failure because I'm super happy with everything that we built. I would say that, even the best construction crew with the best of intentions doesn't have the music experience or the outlook that you have. So I would say check in on a daily basis. I remember coming into one of the first days of framing, and my control room window was to the left side. And I'm like, hey guys, could we check out the plan again and kind of move it back to the center where it should be? Or one of my favorites, the folks who got all the cabling running into the live room instead of the control room. And like, I don't think that's going to work, guys.
Yeah. I'm going to go so far as to say that even a great construction crew, they know what they're doing, but they don't know shit about building a studio. And you have to be so on top of it, in my experience.
That's fair.
From what I've seen. Just because, if you work with a studio designer, that's a different story. They're covering all that. But if you're doing it yourself, you need to know that regular construction is not aware of soundproofing in the same way that you are. They have a totally different conception of it. What is okay, normal, or even great to them is very likely not even close to the standards that you're hoping for yourself. So it really, really does pay off to just be, You don't want to over micromanage, but you want to be on top of every moment and every day and checking in, making, did you guys put acoustic sealant underneath that footer board before you built that wall for studs, all that kind of stuff? Because nobody else is going to pay attention to it like you're going to pay attention to it.
Absolutely. And to echo what you were saying, definitely be kind, be nice. And I would bring donuts and coffee. So,
be like Jacob, don't be like Lidge. Be like Jacob, not Lidge.
I'm sure you're fine. But I mean, if you're a nuisance, you're not gonna get a better control room, right? So just like be nice and be kind, and bring the occasional coffee. They'll appreciate it.
Yeah, it's good thinking. OWC is your one-stop shop for flexible drive storage and connectivity solutions for your studio. The Mini Stack STX for your Mac Mini adds 2 additional drives over a universal SATA HDD SSD bay and an NVMe M.2 PCIe SSD, plus 3 additional Thunderbolt USB-C ports. The OWC Thunder Bay 4 chassis, built like a tank, gives you 4 hot-swappable 2.5-inch RAID configurable drive bays, plus an extra Thunderbolt 3 jack for daisy chaining up to 5 devices. Or check out the OWC Gemini Thunderbolt 3 dock with 2 RAID configurable drives and 7 ports of connectivity, including a front-side SD card reader, 1 gig Ethernet, 2 USB 3.2 ports, a dedicated display port, and an additional backward-compatible Thunderbolt port. Get your studio connected with the Mini Stack STX, Thunder Bay 4, and Gemini Thunderbolt 3 dock at macsales.com/rockstars. Use the custom link in our show notes because it's a great way for you to help support this podcast. So thanks, Rockstars. Howdy, Rockstars. We're back. I'm Lid Shaw. This is Recording Studio Rockstars. My guest today is Jacob Light, joining us from ModernTone Studios near San Francisco, California, Lafayette to be precise, right?
Yeah, absolutely right.
Right on. Well, we're going to jump right back in and keep talking about everything from projects that he's working on now to stuff we can learn about his really cool business model for the studio to, staying healthy, to making killer sounding records, all of it. You ready to jam, dude?
I'm ready to jam. Let's do it.
All right, cool. So you've been working on some cool projects that of course, we do these podcasts in advance, but they will be out by the time this comes out. So tell us what's new in your worlds. I know, can I mention names specifically?
For sure. Yeah, go ahead.
So some of the stuff you sent over, one of them was an artist named Tess Stevens, and it's just a great rock track production, which you're clearly very skilled at. You're very good at taking a band and making it sound powerful and clear, and guitars are pretty awesome. You know what I'm saying?
Thanks, man. You're very
We live in a world. I appreciate records where the guitars are treated with great respect.
Yeah, that's absolutely one of them. Yeah, I love making rock records. What can I say? It's been a lifelong love of mine. So, Tess Stevens, the record is probably going to be out by the time this episode drops. We just wrapped up mixing, and she's shopping the record around. We actually did an EP together a couple of years ago. It came out in actually more than a couple of years ago. But Tess and I have a really interesting relationship. So we're definitely friends now, but her first EP, Patient 139, she wrote in a mental hospital. She was battling addiction and struggling with mental health. And when she got released from the hospital, she was like, okay, I'm ready to dive into music. We did a 4-track EP together. We did pre-production together. I put a band together and we released it, and kind of fresh with this new, she kind of became like this mental health advocate on social media. And she got to the point where she was wanting to end her life, to the point where she had millions and millions of views on TikTok talking about her music and her struggles with mental health. She has over 500,000 people following her.
Wow.
And yeah, it's been a crazy journey. Like Adobe did a thing with her music. It's been amazing. So a year and a half ago, by the time of this recording, we started working together on a full blown record. She brought in, so it was her, myself, and a good friend of mine named Gideon Berger, who's an amazing session drummer. He played in bands his entire life. We played in bands together. Dude's amazing. But between the three of us, we wrote about 35 songs for the record.
Oh, very cool.
And we did pre-production for the better part of 3 months, just like hammering out the songs, fine-tuning them, and getting scratch tracks together. We spent about a week choosing the top 12 that we're going to record, and then just started production. And it was a very, kind of like you said, it's a very layered record. Like we were going for this kind of really bigger than life kind of sound. And it was a record about self-growth, for her. Mm-hmm. So we got all the drums down. I played bass. And then when it came time to test playing guitars, she felt a little bit overwhelmed because, we put so much work into this, and she had to play over Gideon's drum tracks and my bass tracks, and she got imposter syndrome.
Well, I was going to say also just that initial, talk about getting over imposter syndrome, that place of being like in a mental hospital and then choosing to be true to yourself and writing a record about who you are and that whole experience, that can be powerful, powerful stuff.
Yeah, dude, she's amazing. And years later, I asked her why she chose my studio and not like any of the other studios she reached out to. And she said something to the effect of, you're the only one who asked me about the songs.
That's better than if she had said, it kind of reminded me of the first place I wrote my record.
Yeah, probably.
Wow. So that's pretty wild. So when and how did that happen that you asked her about her songs?
She reached out and I asked, she briefly said that she wanted to make an EP, and I was like, yeah, send me some demos. Like I want to figure it out. I want to hear what we're going to work on. And, I got back to her and I had all these notes and I had all these questions about like, what did you mean by that lyric? And where is this going? And is this song talking about this? And are you envisioning stuff like that? Where a lot of other studios were like, oh yeah, we'd love to have you. Or you're available on the 23rd. Yeah. Like I was really interested in what's going on and how to, bring it to life, which is kind of how we started working together.
Now, do you feel like there's a little bit of a distinction there between the response of a studio, the response of an engineer, and the response of a potential producer on an album? Because I mean, here it sounds like you jumped in creatively, as becoming part of the songwriting team, becoming part of the production team and stuff like that.
Yeah, there definitely is. And there is zero criticism in what I'm about to say, but, an engineer captures performances, and that's awesome. And it's an art form in its own right. I was never really that. I mean, I've done a bunch of records like that, but I'm much more of a producer. So a lot of my projects are artists and even bands coming to me with a bunch of songs or ideas or demos, or even just, an idea for a chorus. And we build it together. Like it's people who really need to kind of build it. And even bands who are more established and, have been touring for a while. Often when we work together, it's like, guys, this bridge is not working, like let's figure this out. So I never impose it on anyone. It's not like, oh, you have to like give me a creative freedom if you want to work with me. But I feel like it's my forte, where I'm sure that I'm surrounded by like dozens, if not hundreds of amazing engineers, having the strong music background that I have is what I bring to the table, which is what sets me apart from a lot of people around me, and also why I got this project. By the way, it's also the reason that I probably sometimes lose projects. Some bands are looking for the engineer to capture whatever they have. And, I come up with all these questions and ideas and people are like, screw that. Like, I just want to record my record. Like,
right.
Which is cool.
And I find myself asking artists sometimes where I'm just trying to establish, they're looking for feedback, or they're looking, what are they looking for too? But I agree with you. The very best first answer to anybody asking you a question is to answer with a question.
Yeah.
When a client calls, it's like, first, your answer should almost always be to find out more about who they are, what they're doing, what their goals are, all that.
Right. And I agree. And I think that another reason that you would do that is to figure out if you're the right person for the project. And if this project is right for you, right? Like maybe you're in a mindset or a place in life where like, hey, this is not a good project for me. Like this is not a right choice. So I try to interview my clients as much as I can. And I'm also fortunate in the sense that I can screen my clients and choose the projects that I want to work on. And I have other engineers that work for me. So if something doesn't feel right, like if the communication is not right, or I feel like, you know what, I'm not the best person to bring this project to life, then I'll either refer them to a colleague or have them work with one of my other people.
Yeah, you might be like, I really appreciate you calling and asking me to make this record with you, but I think you might be better off going with the symphony orchestra, Mr. Mozart, because I'm just a little studio with 6 rooms.
Kinda, yeah. Kinda something like that, you know, or, you know, I know this guy and this is totally up his alley. Are you okay with me copying to the email? Like, I'm sure that he'd love to check this out.
Yeah,
you know?
that's a great tip. In the same way, you know, I've heard that a lot of times. It's like, don't think about yourself and what you do as swimming in an ocean full of, you know, sharks and competition. Think about it as a community where you're like, I'm here to help you. And if I can't do it, I'm going to send you over to somebody who can. And that can be really, that always comes back to benefit you in the end too.
Absolutely. And it's just good karma. You know, like we're all musicians, we're all doing this for the love of music. And if I feel like I'm not a good fit, but I do know a person who is, like everyone's going to win, right? Like I'm not going to do a project that I feel like is not right for me. The client is going to get a person who's really enthusiastic about this. And my colleague, more often than not, probably my friend, is going to get work, you know? So everyone's a winner. It's way, yeah, I could not recommend that enough.
Okay. So talk a little bit about that pre-production and writing process. So take us on a journey through, you know, producing this album.
Yeah. So it was a lot of, you know, 3-way sessions where we would meet for, you know, 6-7 hours and had a bunch of, I have a spreadsheet that I use to keep track of production, and it has all these like different sheets in it. So it starts with like demos and kind of goes into production progress. So we had about, you know, 29 or 30 songs in the beginning. And it was a journey, you know, like it was a journey trying to figure out like why something doesn't work, or like I would come up with a chorus, or they would play the chorus for me, and I'm like, I hear what you're doing with the melody. The chords are not supporting that. Like, let's figure out a way to move these chords in a way that feel right. And we just kept massaging these songs over and over and over again until we all got kind of chills in the room. Right. When all of us got chills in the room, that's where we're like, okay, this is the song. Let's do the scratch tracks now. Right.
What are some important conversations to have with an artist at the beginning? How do you know as a producer or a studio person that you might be becoming a co-writer on a song, and what sort of conversation makes sense with an artist?
Well, I don't always end up being a co-writer, but we usually have conversations around the scope of the project, and more often than not, we'll sign some kind of an agreement, right? And the agreement is something that is reflective of our initial conversation, right? So if a label's paying for the record or the artist is paying for the record, they own it, right? Like me as a studio owner, I do not own. This is a work for hire situation, right? Mm-hmm. I am happy to, you know, play on your record. I'm happy to, and I will do my very best to make it happen. The only exception is if during pre-production we get to a point where there's something inherently problematic with the song, or we realize in the course of pre-production that we need a new bridge, a new chorus, and we start becoming co-writers. At that point, we usually I'll do whatever the song needs, and then we'll stop for a second and say, hey, you know what? I just wrote this chorus like from scratch. What do you feel like would be a fair split here? Right? Like, are we going to do like this 80-20 kind of thing? Is it going to be a 50-50? Like, how do you feel? What do you feel is fair? And then we talk about it. I print out a split agreement and we both sign it and we just move on. It is imperative that you do that on the day of production, or at least be honest about it as you're working on it, rather than ending production and going back and saying, hey, I wrote this one chorus 6 months ago. I should get a cut.
And that's a hard lesson to learn. It's really tough to get to that point.
Agreed. And another lesson I learned the hard way.
Yeah. Speaking of imposter syndrome too, it's like that we can often feel like, a lot of us can grapple with what is my built-in role if I'm a producer versus when have I become a songwriter, and when should I ask? So it's just great to hear you describe it. And again, preemptive is a great way to do it. First you start by helping. Mm-hmm. You just help solve the problem. And then once you get there, you identify, hey, I think this just happened. How do you feel about it? So you start with a question, which is, again, good strategy.
And absolutely. And you're honest about it, right? Like, here's what you just have an honest conversation, one person to another, and 99% of the time you figure it out. right? Like the person feels it, right? Like I talk about this chills in the room moment. Everyone feels it. Specifically with Tessa's record, because it was so much of co-writing, we went into it agreeing that it's going to be a 3-way split with the songwriting. Right. It was just an agreement that we kind of made going into it.
That's groovy. Now, what was the next step? How do you go through some of the pre-production process? And when you guys write, do you find it's helpful to write in the same studio that you're going to record the record? Or do you like to write in one place and go to the studio with this, engineer hat on at that time?
Yeah, well, I don't have a strong feeling about that, but in this particular project, we had demos of everything. When I say demos, we had voice memos, right? If you look at my phone, I probably have about 10,000 voice memos. It was a lot of voice memos, mine, hers, Gideon's, just a lot of different voice memos and ideas. So the session would start, we were in the control room, the studio that we actually ended up working in. And we would pull up a demo, listen to it, and then I would have usually Tess perform the song. The way I usually go about it is the first time I hear the song performed, I don't stop. I just want to hear it and experience and feel it. Then the second time I ask her to do it again, and I always say, hey, I'm going to stop you when something feels wrong. Like I'm not always able to identify it, but let's play it. And when something feels like the flow is not there, like something is not there, we're going to stop. That usually happens around the first chorus, but not always. And then, I stop and I say like something is not gelling here. Can I hear that chorus one more time? And then if I know what the answer is, I'll play it for her and say, hey, can we try something like this? Does this work for you? And we'll try it. And if it works, great, we move on. And if it doesn't, we'll just keep throwing ideas. And more often than not, and this is one of the most beautiful parts about this process, is that I'll come up with an idea that will spark Gideon to come up with an idea, and then Tess will go, oh, right, I can do this, and then I would add this to it, and then we're all kind of one-upping each other, and we end up with something that, pardon the cliche, is bigger than the sum of its parts, right? Like it's bigger than something that either of us would be able to write by himself or by themselves, which is another reason we decided on that 3-way split.
And I think that's a good reminder to us too, again, addressing imposter syndrome. Don't feel like the only time that it's okay for you to be included in something is if you felt like you could have just shown up with the complete solution and it either got used that way or it didn't. It's okay to be part of the team and still be included in, considered the songwriting. Of course, that is recognizing everything that Jacob just said about the best way is to have that conversation and get there.
Absolutely. And echoing what you said before, like I think as a producer, engineer, any kind of music person, you help, right? Whatever the help is, right? Sometimes it's moving a microphone. Sometimes it's getting a really great cue mix. Sometimes it's saying, hey, can we try an E chord there? And as long as you're kind about it and you make it obvious that you're working for the song and for the artist and not for your ego. It's not like, I think it needs to be an E chord. That is the only correct chord that needs to go there, right? As long as you present it in a way that's collaborative and fun and kind, then more often than not, the response from the person is going to be appreciation. They're going to feel it.
So one of the things you said pretty quickly, I think if I rewound, you just said we might have had like 10,000 voice memos. Was that the number you threw out there?
I mean, it's probably more like 9,000 something because I think there's a cap at like 10,000s. But yeah, I always take voice memos of any ideas that we have during pre-production.
That's amazing. So talk to us about the boring but crucial aspect of it's not so boring, actually, of how do you keep this shit organized? Again, that's a question that comes later in the show anyway. But, when you've got all this stuff, you've got voice memos, spreadsheets, other things, and you're just like, you're trying to stay organized. A lot of these things we need to be able to find suddenly 5 years later, or in the middle of a conversation, we need to go boop on our phone or on our computer. What are some things you've learned about organizing all this stuff?
Yeah, so I think that or in my experience, it's about having some kind of process. So having an overview of the entire process from pre-production all the way to the final master and figuring out how you want to go about it. So for example, about the voice memos, every record I work on starts with the Google Drive folder. And that Google Drive folder has a bunch of subfolders and some spreadsheets. So like I said, my spreadsheet template starts with a list of all the demos, and that usually includes a link to a different folder in that Google Drive folder with the voice memos or the demos or whatever it is. Then that feeds into the next spreadsheet, which is the production process, right? Like, did we do drums for this song? Do we have the edits for this song? And by the way, all of the color coding for those spreadsheets coincide with my color coding in Pro Tools. So if, like, for example, vocals are yellow because they're universally are, right? But if my vocals are yellow, then my production spreadsheet on vocals is going to be yellow. If my background vocals are orange, and they have to be because that's the only correct way of doing that, then they'll be orange, right? So there's also like this kind of visual thing going on. And then I'll have another spreadsheet with like auxiliary musicians or session musicians, right? Like, we need to bring in a steel player for this. We're going to bring in a vocalist to do this, right? So I'll have a spreadsheet following that. And then I'll have another spreadsheet with like other budgets. Like, okay, so we need to get this going. We're going to rent that thing. We're going to hire this person. We're going to send it out to mastering for this person. And then everything is in that same folder. Then when I'm archiving the project, when I'm done with it, apart from all the, the Pro Tools stuff and the bounces and the stems and all that, I also have that drive folder. I download it and I zip it and I put that with everything else. So in 5 years, to your example, if I'm opening up the project and the person's going like, I wonder what is that? How did this song start? Like, what do you have the original demo? I have the demo. I have the first voice memo. I have the scratch tracks from the pre-production session. Everything is archived in the same place. And like I said, I create a process that works for me, for my production, right, my production style. So that's the answer. Like, figure out some kind of a process that works, and then stick to it. Like, once you figure out what works, for one project, just duplicate it for all the other projects.
So you actually will download your voice memos. And now, are you an iPhone user or an Android user?
Yep.
So you're having to get them exported out of your iPhone or off of your iTunes and dragged into Google Drive folders, which will hold audio clips and things like that as well, right?
Yeah, it's way easier. So you can share it from the voice memo, and then one of the options for share is Google Drive. So you just click Google Drive, you found the right folder, right? Like in this case, Tess Stevens, Runaway, voice memos.
Yeah. Now, another thing that comes to mind too, when you're thinking about links and spreadsheets, so that you can start in one place, but immediately find your way to the other ones, because sometimes finding your way to stuff on these cloud services is a pain in the ass, Sure. I mean, like a complaint I have about Google is if I have a Google Doc open, I'm looking around and I'm like, this doesn't tell me which folder it lives in, unless I start with the folder and find my way there and stuff like that. But one of my struggles is I'm like, oh my gosh, my world's in Google Docs. It's also in Dropbox. It's also in Apple Notes. It's also in Gmail. It's also on the calendar, And when you start thinking about how almost every one of these actually has a shareable link, you realize, okay, I could have a master place that I go to, like the Google Doc, that spreadsheet you talked about, and there's, all the files might be on Dropbox, but there's a link right from the sheet that will take me to that Dropbox folder.
Right. And the entire team is working off of the same folder, right? So if Tess comes up with a new version of the lyrics, then she'll upload it to the lyrics folder and we all get notified. If Gideon has a new drum part that he played over a scratch track that I send, then he'll upload it to the demos with drums folder. So as long as you know what you're doing and everyone, I kind of walk everyone through the process. It's not brain surgery, right? Like it says demos, you upload it to the demos folder. Like it's as simple as that. But I've got an email template that I created, and I send it out on the before we start production, and everyone knows hey, this is what you do in this case. This is how you upload in this case, and we're just all in agreement.
Audio introduces the all-new A-Series line of monitors, featuring the XART accelerated ribbon tweeter design, built-in DSP-based room correction, and speaker voicings, allowing you to customize your Atom Audio monitors to your control room. The A-Series will rock in any studio. Small studio spaces or immersive multi-speaker configurations are perfect for the A4V or the new A7V, the next generation of the incredibly popular A7X. Mid-sized rooms and narrow spaces will love the low-profile A44H, expanding on the A7V sound, or the A77H, a true three-way midfield monitor delivering rich, spacious sound. sound. And bigger studios will love the A8H, a three-way speaker and the pinnacle of the A series that delivers extremely accurate sound required for critical listening environments. Get the Adam audio monitors and subwoofers that are right for your studio with an extended 5-year warranty at adamaudio.com. And I think the key takeaway is you're working with the team, which is where these kind of systems really, really come in handy.
Yep.
In fact, if you work by yourself, you don't have to do everything quite the same way, but it's actually kind of a disadvantage because when you do everything by yourself, sometimes you can be more inclined to like change up your strategy all the time. And then, like you said, down the road, you're like, where did I put that original thing? God, I don't even know where it is anymore, because you changed up your system too many times along the way. So there's a lot of benefits to using these tools and working together with other people to just kind of lock in what the hell it is that you're going to do so you can count on it yourself. Talk a little bit about your archiving strategy, because that's a really important thing for us to all be thinking about and be aware of.
Sure. So I've acted. So there's two parts to it. There's a backup strategy and then there's the archiving strategy, right? So the backup strategy is basically everything gets backed up 3 or 4 times. So I've got my production hard drive, which is my OWC SSD.
Right on. Shout out to OWC.
Love it, absolutely love it. So
is that internal or external?
So both. So when I bought I've got a trash can Mac, and when I bought the NVMe, when I bought the SSD from OWC, they also sent an enclosure for the old NVMe, which is pretty fast in its own right. So now the OWC drive is my production drive, and my old drive lives in this USB enclosure, and that's my hot backup drive. Like that's the drive I take home with me every night with backups, and it's lightning fast. And
so that is with an old trash can. The NVMe is the drive that just looks like a little stick of gum.
Pretty much.
Put it inside
a very expensive piece of gum.
A very expensive piece of gum that the flavor hopefully never goes away.
Yeah. Very minty. That's SSD.
Okay, so you've got that. You've got your internal drive that you're working on. You've got your external drive that you're backing up to.
And I take home every night. That's important.
And do you wait till the end of the session and then duplicate it over to this backup drive and take it home with you?
Yeah, at the end of the day.
Okay, and then do you like to just do a simple drag and drop as a technique for backing up, or do you use fancy backup software?
It's copy and paste, and there's always the option to merge it in Mac OS. So it basically only copies the newer files over. So that's kind of my first thing that I do. But then I also have automated backup. So I use a Carbon Copy Cloner, CCC. Mm-hmm. It's a really nice piece of software. I have an OWC RAID array next to my computer, and it backs and archives everything overnight to that, just in case, just to have another backup of it. And I also use Backblaze to get everything up to the cloud. So I've got 4 backups of everything that I do on a given day, just to make sure that, if one backup failed or there was an issue or whatever, even though there hasn't been to date, my files are safe. Like I didn't lose a work of, squeezing someone's soul in through the microphone and having to call them back the next day and say, hey, would you mind coming back on Tuesday?
Yeah. It's great that you bring up Backblaze again. I use them and I think it's fantastic. And would you believe it? I was at one of the conferences, AES or NAB was right next door, and there was Backblaze, and I went and said hi to him. And according to my conversation, they kind of had no idea how important they are to the audio industry.
Oh man,
and I was like, you guys don't even know. Like,
wow.
You're saving the day constantly for us.
I've been using Backblaze for about a decade. And so moving on to my archiving, Backblaze becomes even more important. So I've got 2 OWC RAID arrays, and one is for samples and one is for archiving. So when I'm done with a project, I archive it to the OWC. But then I also have an archiving hard drive that I kind of just toss at home, like a cheap, USB hard drive. And then I also use a service called Backblaze B2, which is this unmanaged version of their backup software. It's basically like a big bucket, if you think about it. It's like a storage unit for files. It's incredibly cheap. It's something along, like, don't quote me, but something along the lines of $5 for a terabyte. and you use like an FTP software. Like I use FileZilla, but you can use whatever. And when we're done with the project, you just create a new folder, you move everything up there, and it's there forever, and you never have to worry about it.
Wow.
And so all of these things, cost a little bit of money. But in my experience, it's really easy to pay that by helping out clients. Because I have clients, every few years, a client will call up and say, hey, do you have that record we did 5 years ago? My hard drive just failed and whatever. And I charge them a really, a small fee, but that fee helps me pay for backups and archiving for the year.
Yep. That's what I was doing too. Same thing as just my own version of archiving, and then just charge a small archive recovery fee.
Exactly.
For old projects. And hopefully, the one thing a year pays for the pair of hard drives or that extra Backblaze expense or whatever you've got. And I haven't explored the B2 feature. That's pretty awesome. It's funny because FTP clients, we get into this weird, super techie language now,
Sure.
But that's how we used to do stuff, in the studio before Dropbox was the way. And
I vividly remember.
And I kind of noticed conspicuously no mention of Dropbox yet, but I'm assuming that maybe that's part of your process as well.
I do not use Dropbox. I've never have.
Wow.
I've never used Dropbox ever. Like I use WeTransfer to send some files if I need to. But between Google Drive and B2, I don't really need it.
What's it like living on another planet?
It's. I'll send you a postcard. It's not bad.
No, look at this. This is the dusty red Alps of my home on Mars.
Yeah, I'll add it to my business card. No Dropbox. Sorry,
Yeah.
are they a sponsor? I'm sorry.
No.
Okay.
But I mean, I of course I use them all the time for stuff. All right, let's keep jumping forward. So Bridget Boyle is another artist that you worked with recently. So tell us about that record, and then another one that we'll talk about is Lipstick.
Sure. So Bridget Boyle, funny enough, is actually one of my employees. She's one of my vocal coaches.
Oh, yes, I think I've seen her photo. Speaking of which, that's on your website. You got all these great photos of all your teachers.
She's just freaking amazing. Like she's amazing. She had a few years ago, she had a really tough year. A lot of things in her life changed, from like romantic changes to death in the family to stuff like that. And this was her third record. She basically wrote a record, and she massaged it a lot. Like she performed acoustically a lot, and she ran it by a bunch of people. And she showed up for this record very, very, very confident and prepared. But the material that she brought me was very honest and fragile. So when we talked about doing this record together, I told her in advance, hey, like I'm going to make you uncomfortable. Like this is not a comfortable record. So I did a bunch of things, and it was kind of, it was interesting because of that whole like employer-employee dynamic. We kind of have to put that aside for a minute and just, become musicians and people and friends. So I did a lot of things to make her uncomfortable and a little bit less than, confident. For example, I put a band together around her, and I refused, like I forbade them from practicing. Like, you are not arranging these songs in advance. We're going to wire up everything in the studio. We've got 2 or 3 days to get this down. We're going to get this, everything in the studio. We're going to run every song 3 to 4 times. That last take is what we get, right? Like, like it, warts and all. We're going to do this live, and we're going to feel, we're going to feel it that, the drummer is not 100% clear on what feel is going to happen, but it's going to happen. And the chorus is going to happen. Everyone learned the songs in advance. Like, we send demos to everyone. Everyone sent the charts back to me. I compared the charts, make sure that, when there's a G chord, everyone knows that it's a G chord. But no arrangements. And they haven't played together before that. So we got this magical performance from everyone, which was really, really cool to have it all happen in the studio. We tracked bass, drums, and acoustic guitars live, which was really, really fun, and scratch vocals, of course. And then we started layering the album, like overdubbing the live recording. And we had some amazing musicians join us, like Vicki Randall sang backup vocals in one of the songs. She was a band member on The Tonight Show with Jay Leno. That was like a big day when Vicki showed up, and it was crazy. Like, she went through the lyrics and, just started highlighting things. She was kind of mumbling to herself like 5 minutes, and then, looked up and like, I'm ready, let's do this. And just knocked out like, 4-part harmonies in one take. It was, crazy.
Wow. Wow.
We had a cellist come in. It was really cool.
Well, it's one of the benefits about working with, professional musicians on a session occasionally I have an artist that I work with where I get to assemble a band of session artists, session musicians, and it really is a different way of approaching a record. When you start a record with young musicians or a band that needs to really kind of rehearse their way into confidence, then you have to do some level of rehearsal before a session. But when you start with professional musicians that really know, the rehearsal is just, do I know the song? Have I looked at the chart? Then you leave that moment, that spark in the studio for the discovery of the sound to that moment. In fact, I've rehearsed a band of session musicians before a session where we did it all Friday and then we came in on Monday and they had all forgotten all their parts by Monday, which I think is actually in the same way that we can mix a song all day long and they're like, how can you listen to the same thing all day? It's like, well, I have this incredible ability to forget all about it. I think session musicians have this ability to completely forget what they did on Friday because otherwise they'd go crazy,
Yeah.
Holding all those songs in their heads. But that's very cool.
Just to be clear, I don't advocate, you should definitely practice before coming into the studio, always. This was a very specific situation where things were too tight. It was too confident. I needed to kick her out of her comfort zone because the record is called Heartbreak Residue. It talks about heartbreak and letting go and your life falling apart. And I can't have a band that is super tight and sounds, like they've been doing this their entire life, talking about, how their lives are falling apart. It's just not believable.
Yeah,
it was a very specific...
They can't show up with a musical six-pack.
Yeah, exactly, right? And
if
talk
they're all
about
guys, I guess.
Yeah, well...
Well, no, exactly. Women have six-packs too. Or never mind. I don't know where I'm going with that. Everybody could look like they have a six-pack if they want.
Six-packs all around.
Six-packs all around. All right, so... Yeah. Now, one of the things that I did notice about that record is great guitar tones. You talked about kind of earthy guitar tones and stuff like that, but just really good blues guitar sounds. I seem to recall them even sounding kind of wide and not just like a single 57 straight up the middle. What were some of the things you want to share about getting the guitar sounds on that?
First of all, thank you. I played the electric guitars on that record. So I used a lot of crap. I've got a lot of amps and I've got a lot of guitars. So in that regard, I was very fortunate. So a few tips on that. To get the wideness, I used two very different techniques. So one side was all mostly 60s Fender Bandmaster through a 112 cab. And I have this vintage ribbon mic that was about 2 feet away from the cab. And then the other side was a 412 Marshall, with a 57 and a 421 on it, very kind of right up to the grill. So right off the bat, you're getting this kind of wideness just by having the mics at different distances from the amp. I also used a lot of kind of contrary ideas. So the song that we talked about earlier is called Gravity. And I kind of have this dissonance in the record when one side is very kind of earthy Hendrix style kind of strat into a Marshall playing kind of blues riffs, and then the other side is this kind of echoing guitar going like which was, by the way, all analog delayed, tracked, printed to Pro Tools. Nice. And the idea was to kind of represent, earth versus the air, right? Having the delay. So having these contrary ideas coupled with different guitars, different amps, different miking techniques, different angles really, really help with that. And then
it makes it fun too. It gives you a strategy for how you want to approach it. I mean, it's like art in the art museum. Art can stand on its own 2 feet for art's sake, but it's also fun to read the plaque and find out what the artist was thinking,
Absolutely. Endless fun. And a lot of why. Why should we do this? Why should we do that? How does that part, support that song or that message? And then another thing that I do, and I sometimes get in trouble, but I distort everything. I honestly do. So a lot of these kind of tremolo, open kind of guitar chords, I can compress them, sure, but some of what is making the tone the way it is just distorting the mic pre's. So I clip the mic pre's as a way to get both harmonics and kind of control the transients a little bit. So a lot of these I kind of set it to where if I hit really, really hard, it's going to clip the mic pre in a really obnoxious way. And then I have to kind of really control my right hand to make sure that I only kind of, I get to like 99 and never like really, really hit 100. And you get this very kind of focused, it just brings the part up and helps a lot with both the wideness and the frontness of it, if you will, and helps control the dynamic range without ever having to use a compressor.
What mic pre's do you like to use for that kind of clipping?
How much time do you have? So
we've got it was like 10 hours. Rockstars is cool if we make this podcast episode 10 hours long.
then I can walk you through about half of my preamps. So I'm a huge fan of Cappy. Shout out to Jeff Steiger in Nashville. Wow, Cappy preamps are just freaking amazing. I like VP 312s. They're kind of like API style preamps with 2520 op amps. The cool thing about them is they have separate preamp gain and output gain. So you can totally kind of distort the preamp and then kind of pull it back with the fader. I'm also a big fan of Vintech 573s. They're like Neve clones, and they're just gain for days. Damn. So like distort the crap out of them, and then so the way I usually go is distort way too much, and then move it back one click.
And Neves kind of have such a great, unique 1073s particularly have a great, unique distortion to them.
Absolutely, but I'm talking about like straight up clipping, like really kind of clipping the top of it, almost using it as like a makeshift limiter, and then pulling back the output to help to adjust the gain and kind of getting your gauge staging right. And if I'm following it up with like an LA2A or something like that, just to kind of make sure that I'm hitting it at just the right volume. But pretty much every guitar tone that you've heard on any of my records have been distorted and clipped to some way, shape, or form on the preamp.
That's awesome. And then Rockstars, a reminder, we have a link to Jacob's playlist in the show notes. So please scroll down, click through there, and it'll take you right over and you can just listen to the complete collection of records and hear all this stuff too.
Thank you. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to, be specific. So reach out. And then so you ask about guitars. One of the best tools I ever bought for the studio is an Ampeg system selector. It's basically a 3U rack unit that helps you route different tube amps to different cabinets. So I have about 7 or 8 tube heads in my control room. And then I had 2 or 3 different rooms set up with different cabs. And you just like a rotary knob, like you go from amp 1 into cab 3 and in real time, and it sends load to the amps just so you don't blow the transformer. And you can go from, a roaring Marshall to a really tamed Fender to like a Silvertone to whatever it is you want. And I have way too many way more pedals than I like to admit. So like putting guitar tones and moving between guitar tones is so easy. And it just takes out, when you have a really good idea for a guitar tone, but it takes like 10 minutes to set up, like that's such a buzzkill, when you're in the studio and working. Especially
then
when
you end up, then if you're lucky, you end up just sort of using the same setup the whole time and never changing it. And, maybe you change your pedals. I feel like inevitably you change the easiest thing there is to change.
You settle, right? You settle for something because you want to play. Like you want to get to the part where you play and you don't feel like setting up, mics and running them or whatever, right? So I set up everything in advance. My days are usually net. So when I work 8-hour days, that means that I set up before the artist gets here. So I usually set up. I have multiple mics on the cabinets. The cabinets are all set up in the other rooms. And the system selector, the Ampeg box, just lets you move around between all these in a really convenient way. Fun fact, by the way, that it was never a commercially available product. It's something that Ampeg developed for mom and pop shops to demonstrate their amps.
Oh, interesting.
Wow. I found it on eBay. It's such a cool product. Ampeg, if you're listening, please make it commercially available. It's amazing.
Well, so now a version of that. So on my record, Skadoosh, which is now out Rockstars, make sure you look for that link. I don't know if it's in the show notes. It might be.
I heard it. It's great.
Yeah, thank you.
Really well done, man.
Thank you. But in that one, I was doing a lot of guitar work, and one of the things I did, I had one cabinet that I wanted to use out in the live room or the amp room, but I had a bunch of different guitar heads in the control room, and so I would, and I think this was okay to do, I would turn them all on and put them all on standby, and then I just move the speaker cable over to a particular amp, take it off standby, and see how I like the guitar on that amp, and then if I wanted to switch amps, I could just hit the power standby, move the speaker cable over to the next guitar amp. But it's such a fun way to get a really different variety of guitar sounds very quickly and easily. Obviously, when we live in a world of digital plug-in guitars, it's easy to do that stuff. Although I actually find digital plug-in guitars challenging sometimes because I feel like I'm not always certain that the gain staging is accurate or where it's supposed to be. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, for
Whereas
sure.
with a guitar amp, you just get a natural sense of like, this guitar is hitting the amp, right? That's all great. We'll just, what it comes out of the speakers is what it's supposed to be.
For sure. And you're also kind of, and this is, again, no criticism at all. This is just like my point of view. You're also kind of relying on other people's engineering abilities to get that guitar tone, right? Which is awesome. Like if you're practicing at home or, you have a home studio or whatever, like, wow, those things are freaking amazing. But when you're running a commercial studio and you're working on like quote unquote forever records, right? Like I want to have the challenge of creating my own guitar tone. And if I screwed up the phase, then I need to learn better for next time. But or if I over distorted things, and I need to learn for next time. But creating things yourself, it's just like it's inspiring to me.
That's cool, man. If you are mixing music, podcasts, or audio for video, and you want it to sound amazing, then iZotope has got your back. With RX, Ozone, Neoverb, Nectar, and VocalSynth, you'll have a collection of powerful apps and plugins that will help you get a professional sound in no time. Whether you're looking to clean up your vocal recordings with RX, master your tracks with Ozone, or add depth and ambience to your mixes with Neoverb, iZotope is your magic wand for awesomeness. Plus, with Nectar and VocalSynth, you can easily add creative effects and unique textures to your vocals and instruments. From subtle mix enhancements to extreme sound design, iZotope takes your music and podcast productions to the next level. Go to iZotope.com/rockstars and use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off. All right, so let's jump forward to this third record, Lipstick, huge rock band sound. It sounds like, at first listen, it sounds like the band is just loud in the room, but it all adds up just right. And I know those can be really challenging for us in the studio, the whole variety of records that we always do. And I think, these three artists that we're talking about it's a nice diverse collection of musical examples. But talk a little bit about what was the deal with Lipstick, and am I correct in thinking about loud music in a loud room?
Yeah, if anything, you're understating it. They were insanely loud. So Lipstick is this thrash metal, West Coast hardcore kind of band. Huge guitars, super loud drums, growling vocals, like really, really, really loud band. And it was an interesting project because, first of all, I saw the band live a couple of times and they were just killing it, right? Like they're super tight. But within the band, like it's like this little super group of all these other hardcore, like people that came from all these different hardcore bands in the Bay Area. And I wasn't like, they created something new with this band, right? But I'm not sure they were all in the same place. Like one of them talked about like dirtying it up and doing like a Black Flag type record, and the other ones were talking about, oh, he needs to make it super polished and big, and it needs to be more like I don't know what was the reference was, but this very kind of
social distortion or something. That's a little.
Well, I wish it was kind of more like, we need to make it like the super pristine kind of modern metal record where everything is programmed and like we need to find. But they were all agreed that it needs to feel right? And again, kind of going back to, so I'm a firm believer that, like I said before, growth and comfort can coexist, right? Like if you're super comfortable, you're doing the same record that you've done over and over again, you're probably not creating something great, right? So I was looking to put everyone in an uncomfortable position. Like I wanted to create something that's interesting, right? So the first thing I did, and this is not something that I usually do, but I recorded it in a different studio. Like we actually cut live tracks at a different studio in Oakland. It's like the super gritty kind of neighborhood. Like I don't know if you've ever been to Lafayette, California, but it's a wonderful, scenic kind of small town. It's just beautiful. Beautiful.
I have not been there, but I believe one of your neighbors is none other than our brother from another podcast, Matt Boudreau of the Working Class Audio Podcast. Is that
the nicest person in the audio industry. Yeah. So Matt is, a 3-minute drive, and you're overdue for a visit, my friend.
I'll take second nicest or somewhere on the the top 100 list, maybe.
you guys are out there on the top. Like it's a draw. So speaking of that, you're way overdue for a visit. So please come on by. But Lafayette is this really sweet, nice, beautiful small town. And Lipstick is this obnoxious, kind of loud, thrash metal band. So I took them to this gritty neighborhood in Oakland, the studio, Survivor Sound, which I cannot recommend enough. They have this Neve broadcast console, which was beautiful. And basically what I did is say, hey, guys, we're tracking this all live. And there's no metronome, and we're doing vocal, we're doing everything live. You're not going to get to edit. You're not going to get to second guess yourselves. You're not going to get to beautify this record, right? We're going to get this gritty, big sound, but what you're going to bring into this is what you're going to get out of it. So you better be in shape. By doing that, by setting it up like that, they changed everything about the way they practiced, right? Like they're started getting, they came to the record so amazingly prepared. So we put the drums and the guitars and bass in the room. The amps were isolated, and there's a little booth looking into the control room where we did the vocals. But we cut 10 songs all live. I distorted the heck out of that Neve console. It's a Neve 5316. I believe it's that. It has a 24 track. Returns with stereo auxes. It was awesome. Like the rack was to die for. And basically I distorted everything. That was kind of like my thing going into it. And it took us about 4 or 5 hours to set up, but then we cut about seven tracks the first day and that 3 or 4 the next day. Then we listened back. We did a couple of patches. Like there was a chorus that we punch in the bass. There was like this one drum fill that we did. But for the most part, the record is everything that we captured on the floor that day. And the band, like when we were done with it, we were kind of exhausted, but the band came to me and they were like, we've never had a recording experience like this. Like this is not, we were so used to, calling it in and like having, layer the drums and then layer the guitars, layer the bass and just like never like really meeting each other in the studio. And this was just like groundbreaking for them. And when you listen to the record, it doesn't sound like I'm pretty sure that I can put it down to a metronome. Like they were that tight.
Wow.
But we got that energy, right? Like that grueling energy. And you can hear the vocalist like straining to growl for so long. And you can hear, the sweat hitting the snare drum. Like it was so much fun working on that record. And then we came back to ModernTone and we did some overdubs. Like we doubled the guitars, we tracked some guitar solos there. If you listen to it, there's tons of like really cool shreddy kind of things. We did some overdubs, but yeah, that was basically the record, like whatever we cut in those 2 days.
So talk a little bit about the, unless you just said it, the arrangement of like, are the amps right next to the drums? Are you, what made it all add up for the right kind of thing as far as just sonically? Did you embrace bleed or did you try and isolate?
So we ended up isolating. I knew that they were going to, because of how complex the music is, I realized that we're going to need to make some edits, and we made very, very small ones, but I realized that we're going to need to do that. Also, the band is so incredibly loud that bleed was just not an option. It was just loud beyond anything that, we could control. So if it was a softer band, I would definitely embrace bleed, maybe even set up some figure of 8, ribbon mics and try to get some cancellations. But we ended up isolating the amps. And these are all like, I'm talking about like angle heads, 412 cabinets, and, like diming it.
Yeah.
It's...
Did you ever read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Do you remember there was it was either in that one or The Restaurant at the End of the Universe or So Long, Thanks for All the Fish, one of those. But it was that great story about the loudest rock band in the universe.
Yeah.
And they were so loud that they had to play their instruments by remote control from a spaceship orbiting the planet. And the only appropriate way to watch the concert was 50 miles from the stage in a concrete bunker. And that's how people enjoyed the music.
That sounds like Lipstick. Funny. I asked him, like, how do you guys rehearse at these levels? I made the mistake of plugging my headphones into one of the mixers for the guitar player.
Oh, wow.
And it was just like, even before I put the headphones on, it was just like way too loud. I'm like, okay, like you guys are playing at a whole other level. Like you have your own sense of volume.
So that brings up some things that come to mind as far as that goes. In my studio, one of the things I learned from Bill Skibby when we got a chance to work at his studio in Benton Harbor, Michigan, Key Club Recording. He had gun earmuffs hanging by the door to the studio. And it really struck me. It's like, oh, like why blow your hearing up when you're running a session? Just grab a pair of these, the stuff, the earmuffs you put over, they're like 40 decibel blocking out that you would put on your ears on a shooting range, for example, and just put them on your head when you're walking from the control room out to the live room. And then when the band's rocking, the drummer's hitting the snare drum, you just don't even care. You can lean right in and move a mic into place and your ears are safe and protected. So that was a great takeaway for me. And so now I always hang them as you're walking from the control room out to the big room. You just can grab them. They're right there if you need them. And then another thing that I sort of discovered for myself was going out and playing guitar on a tracking session where I'm right near the drums and everything really does get crazy. We didn't have amps going, but the drums themselves are loud. And, I was really struck by all the times where a musician tells me they need something in the headphones and as the engineer, I'm like, oh, whatever, it sounds good in the mix. If it sounds good in the mix, it should work for you, And then you go out there and play guitar and you're like, no, it doesn't work. Like the drums are insane right in here. I don't need drums in the headphones. I just need I need a slightly different mix. Plus it was getting way too loud for me. So I learned put earplugs in and then put the headphones on while you're standing next to the drummer and then, turn the headphones down if you can, or turn it all to wherever it could go. But just stuff like that, it's not obvious at first that you might put headphones on and earplugs at the same time, but there are situations where that's what you got to do.
You do what you got to do to protect your hearing, for sure. We use in-ears a lot. I keep, I'm a big fan of the Shure SE215s. I've got a bunch of them. And if a band doesn't have in-ears and we're going to do something live, I have them buy just the little foam thingies that you put on top of the headphones. On top of the earphones are like $15. And I clean the headphones with rubbing alcohol. And then they use the in-ears, not the headphones. And they use my in-ears to the session with, the new part that you put inside your ear. And that helps protect your hearing. You can control volume a lot more. It helps protect you from, the drums and everything else. And it makes it so that the mix. So I'm a big fan of doing Q mixes myself. I have a dual Q system. I also have the mixers, right? But I like to control my Q mixes. It makes it so if I have, some like the guitar player in the control room and the bass player and the drummer on the floor, then they can use the same mix in a comfortable way. Right? Like they hear enough drums, they hear enough bass, they hear enough everything because they're all kind of isolated in the same way that you would be if you were on tour. And they're fairly affordable, by the way. The Shure SE215s are like $80 to $100. They're not very, very expensive. I've paid double for, nice studio headphones.
Right, exactly. So, and now that will work if you're working with an artist enough that you can get them to buy the foam things, or could you just have a bunch of foam things sitting around and anybody who comes in to do a session can just pop them on and go?
Both. So again, like the foam thingies, that's a technical term, by the way, foam thingies.
Right, exactly.
They're like $15, right? So and it comes in like a 20 pack or whatever, 20 pairs. So I always keep it in the studio, funny enough, for the opposite situation. So when you do like a very kind of soft singer-songwriter, right? And you're doing this very kind of soft, strummy acoustic guitar, and you don't want the click to bleed.
Oh, fascinating,
right?
Yeah.
So I just reach out to my closet. I show them, hey, like I'm opening this new thing. I use rubbing alcohol just to kind of make them feel comfortable that they're, putting something deep inside their ears.
Right.
And we use the in-ears just as a way to kind of get a clean take. So it works for both volume extremes, I would say. So yes, I keep them in the studio, but when we're working on a record, it seems like a reasonable request, right? Like in the same way that you would set up a guitar or get new strings, just, get some ear thingies for the earphones.
Yeah, no, that's cool. I just didn't know if it was more of a commitment that would only work for an artist that's going to be there for a lot of sessions or something like that. But so, all right, well, that's a great tip. So now, do you find that people, I know people do it on the stage all the time, but do people tend to say that they have a positive experience singing with in-ear monitors as opposed to singing with regular headphones?
That's a sensitive one. Not necessarily. I think it depends on the singer. It depends on if we're cutting the vocals live or not, right? So if we're cutting the vocals live, absolutely. Getting to be in your own world, and setting the way that you view the mix, the way that you're presented with the mix is valuable. If we're doing overdubs for vocals, probably not. A lot of vocalists are fans of taking off, one side of the headphones at whatever. So I think that the less things that are jammed in their ears, the better. I will say that I did work with a couple of artists who were just big fans. They were gigging a lot and they were used to the in-ears, and it was just like where they felt comfortable.
Yeah. I can imagine that there might be an experience because the in-ear potentially, I don't know if it does, but it seems like potentially it brings the driver closer to your eardrum. So there might be actually just a tiny bit less phase cancellation between your natural voice and what's coming out of the in-ears versus what you experience in headphones. It's one of those things I never even thought about until I started singing more on a mic and putting headphones on and trying things like you flip the phase on your mic, which should theoretically not really make any difference. Like if you're in the control room and you flip phase on a vocal mic, sure, there are times where people say, oh, you will hear the difference, but it's extremely subtle, absolute phase on a vocal. But in a pair of headphones, it sounds totally different because you're actually canceling low end or adding low end in different ways against your own head voice.
That checks out.
It's a weird thing.
Interesting. That's a great tip, by the way.
Yeah, thanks. It's just good to, I don't know if there's what I just said, I don't know if there's a right or wrong to that. It's more like it's very eye-opening. It's very ear-opening to experience that and be like, oh, wow, I'm hearing the phase difference.
Yeah, but I think that it's important to have all these different tools and ideas, under your belt, because when you're working with the vocalist, it's really about making them comfortable and getting the best kind of take. So if you have, and if something is not working and you're like, oh, how if we just flip the polarity in this and try it? And all of a sudden, like even sometimes it's even the placebo effect of, you know what, here's a couple of knobs, try this, and all of a sudden, like you get this new, like it's like a fresh start, This is going to solve all your problems. Check this out. We flip the polarity, and whether it's placebo or not, you get kind of a fresh start. And if that didn't work, hey, let's try something else. Let's try a bunch of other things until things feel right. Like I was working with an artist, and she was used to singing in the car. Like that was her safe space, right? Like she used to sing in the car, and we tried the control room, we tried the live room, we tried the vocal booth. We just couldn't get a take where she was happy with. I ended up bringing a mic in her car. We figured out a way to get an SM7 in the car. I ran a long XLR back to the control room, and we tracked the entire EP in her car. Whatever awesome. Works, man.
That's great. Well, it's like that old Far Side cartoon where the engineer is like mixing the live band and he turns up the suck knob. So like we need a reverse suck knob in the studio where just this knob, you just turn it down. I just turned down the suck knob. How's that? And then they're like, oh, it's great now.
Do you have the mixing version for that?
I got to work on it. That's maybe the design one.
Like the unsucking plugin?
So talking about hearing and protection, before we kind of close out here, one of the things that just brings to mind is just health and life balance and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. You spend a lot of time working long hours in the studio. You're trying to balance that against family life. I've met you. You seem like a healthy individual, Okay. You still got youth on your side, my friend. But beyond that, what are some of the choices that you're making? Just, do you think about, I want to make records for a long time. I don't want I don't want to physically and mentally, and spiritually decay here in the studio so that I can't do it at some point. What are some choices you make around that, and how do you try and stay in, good health?
Sure. Growing up, I was this nerdy kid who was really into, music and recording. So I think my athleticism kind of suffered because of that, right? Because I would always prefer to work on a song or go to band practice than, go work out. And when I started performing a lot, I realized that my stamina was not as good as I wanted it to be, right? Like I wanted to give more of myself, and my body wasn't having it. So in my early 20s, actually my late teens, I started just exercising a lot. And I realized that the more I exercised, the better guitar player I was. Or all of a sudden I would go to 6-7 hour rehearsals holding my incredibly heavy Les Paul and not going home and being exhausted, right? Like I would have, the stamina to do another one if I needed to. And sometimes I would do them back to back. So I wake up at 5 a.m. every single morning. My wife is still not sure how I do that, but I've been doing it for over 20 years. I usually exercise. So I meditate a little bit in the morning. I try to read. I try to avoid the news in the first couple hours of the day. And I exercise for at least an hour. I change it up. I used to do a lot of running. I was a big runner, especially back in Tel Aviv. I do indoor rowing now, which is really cool. It's high intensity and it's not so hard on the knees. And then I practice music to some degree. Like, so after exercising, if I have time, I'll practice the guitar a little bit, or I'll listen to mixes, or I'll just do something that's kind of creative, have breakfast with my family, and, start the day at around, 8 or 9. So when I'm done with my morning routine and I feel healthy and I feel better and I'm already up, I still have the day in front of me as opposed to, waking up at 9 and starting your day at noon, which again, no criticism. It's just not doesn't really work for me.
Yeah. And the rowing thing, is this like a machine that you can just sit at? Is it like one of these things that has the water and it's spinning in there, or the air pressure, and you just kind of row that way, or do you have to go to the gym for it?
So it's air pressure. I don't have it at home. Yeah, I go to a studio in my house, and they have these classes. So we usually do a bunch, like we go back and forth between rowing and weights, and rowing or body weight or things like that. Yeah. So I do that 3 or 4 times a week, and then I do weights at home a couple of times a week. Sometimes I'll just do some, body weight stuff. Sometimes I'll go out for a run. I just want to keep I want to keep being active. Yeah.
The nice thing about doing the class thing, especially for an early riser, is, for me, it might be challenging to keep myself on that early morning schedule. I've done it before, but I tend to do all my exercise at the end of the day. But the class thing, it's like, you've got a place to be at a certain time. So that could maybe help with consistency like that. Right. What about how you like to eat?
Well, I try to eat healthy. I've been a vegetarian for about 13 years now, 6 of which vegan. The pandemic kind of hit the vegan side a little bit, but I try to eat well. I try to eat to stay away from things that I'm not sure what they're made of. Like if there's too many ingredients, then I don't know about that. I'm not a quote unquote health nut. Like, I'll eat the occasional, veggie burger or whatever, but I feel like, you are what you eat, and I want to eat well. And, a lot of it is being able to be focused, right? Like, so when you're working an 8, 9, 10 hour session, you're constantly focused, right? Like whether you're producing or recording or playing. And if you eat junk, it's really difficult, to stay focused, right? Like, a lot of bands that come in here, like, start the first day with like, I don't know, Red Bulls or sodas or whatever, and they crash after lunch.
Yeah.
And then the second and third day, they realize, okay, maybe pizza and Coke wasn't the best idea for a studio.
Right. Beer and pizza too. Those two things can be so wonderful for that moment that you're having them.
Yeah. Especially if you want to have a short 2-hour sessions and then take
exactly.
a nap.
Do you ever feel like the time that you've spent watching YouTube videos, trying out mix tricks, and tweaking version after version of your mixes has gotten you nowhere? Have you been looking for a simple, straightforward, step-by-step process for creating a pro mix that won't take you years to learn? What if you could have a Grammy-winning mix engineer who understood all your mixing struggles and could coach you through them? If you struggle with any of these questions, then the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass is just for you. Now you can discover the proven step-by-step mix system from Grammy-winning mixer Craig Alvin for consistently creating a pro-quality mix from your home studio that will sound amazing everywhere. Listen to this quote from one of our students, David. Quote, "Absolutely the most informative and helpful block of information and mentoring on the mix process that I've ever been a part of. That was like sitting behind a mix engineer for years, watching and picking up tips along the way, but condensed into a 6 to 7 hour session." Close quote. Look, I'm so confident that this will take your mixes to the next level that if you can't get a killer mix within 30 days, I'll give you a full refund, no questions asked. So if you're ready to take your mixes to Grammy-winning quality, then go to ultimatemixingmasterclass.com and start now by checking out the free preview of the ultimate snare mixing trick. And I'll see you at the front row table of the Grammys. Cheers. Yeah, when it comes to things like Red Bull, I rarely have one, but if I have it, it's when I know there's only 30 minutes left in that drive and I just got to make it until 4 a.m. when we arrive at our destination or whatever. Cause I'm like, this will give me a half an hour of like bazing, but then I'm going to crash.
Right.
Not literally, just sleep wise.
Yeah, I hear you. So yeah, eating, I guess eating well or watching what you eat, not in like a keeping your figure kind of thing, more in like keeping your body, your machine healthy.
Yeah.
I use the same approach for maintaining my gear, right? Like I spend so much time maintaining my guitars and maintaining my studio and maintaining my cables and whatever. And it seems crazy to me to not do that for my body, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I think about if I treat my car well, it's going to last a long time. And I'm like, oh, if I treat my body well, it's going to last a long time too. Same thing.
Hopefully.
All right. Well, so now we've gone a really good long stretch. So I know that you are a thorough guest and you probably prepared some questions and answers. The jam session questions, which ones, we could jump right to the end of it, or if there's any particular ones that we didn't hit yet that you'd like to hit. Anything come to mind there, Jacob?
I can hit all of them really quickly if you want me to.
Let's do it, man.
I mean, this is so much fun. Like, do we have to end it?
Ready, steady, go. When you started out in recording, what was holding you back?
Being too heavy-handed, trying too hard. I would read in forums that you have to do these EQ things or you have to do these compression things. And I would just, I would have crazy EQ curves on everything and crazy compression. And I was just like trying so hard to make things perfect. And by doing that, I was kind of doing the opposite. So when I learned to just like lay back, listen, do I really need, 6 dB of 250 on this? Like, let's dial it back a little bit, man.
Yeah. I think for me, sometimes it's listening to a mix or song and saying, is there really a problem that I need to solve? Maybe it's already good,
Amen.
Maybe this is what that sound is and this is great.
And take forums with a grain of salt.
Take forums? You mean like
forum advice
forums?
with a grain of salt,
yeah.
Right? Like whenever someone tells you have to do this or always do that, yeah, I don't know about that.
Well, now, Rockstars, if you're reading the forums all the time, that much salt might be bad for you. So maybe 1 grain, I guess. Okay.
Touché.
All right. How about some of the best advice you received?
Fix it in pre-production. There's this cliche about fixing in the mix. Yeah, I'll fix it in the mix, man. Fix it in pre-production. I was working with this band and one of the mixing notes was, we want the chorus to be bigger. I'm like, yeah, I'll do my best, guys, but this is something that we should have figured out. Now, if we would have done pre-production for these demos, we would have figured an arrangement that would bring up the chorus, right? So fix it in pre-production. Never fix it in the mix. Yeah.
And Rockstars, my tip is if you can avoid even having the conversation about we should have, just don't. Just do it right. Find a way to get into that pre-production with that band and make it work.
Yeah, whenever possible.
Yeah, whenever possible. Yeah. Every time you find yourself having an answer that says, well, this isn't my fault, it should have been solved beforehand, see it as an opportunity to solve it. That's what I'm getting at too.
Absolutely. And do your best to not wait to solve it. Like solve it at the moment before you make the mistake, instead of saying, oh, I'll figure it out along the lines. I'll figure it out at the end.
All right. How about sharing a recording tip, hack, or secret sauce, something the Rockstars could use right now on their next session?
There's a mic manufacturer. Hopefully I'm not butchering the name. It's called Soyuz. They make fantastic mics. And they have this newish product that came out in the last couple of years. It's called the Launcher. So it's an active gain kind of thing, kind of like a cloud lifter, right? It's a little box that you put in front of your dynamic mic or your ribbon mic, and you feed it phantom power, and it gives you like 25% or 25 dB of gain. But as opposed to the cloud lifter, it's not clean gain. It's very, very colored gain.
Oh, cool.
It has a transformer, and I think the idea is to kind of get this like vintage, like quote unquote, like vintage console sound, right? It just gives you a bit more saturation and a bit more color going into whatever it is you're doing. And it's just a nice tool to have. Like you don't always want the cleanest gain. Sometimes you just want to be obnoxious about things or just color them a little bit.
Where are some instruments that you've enjoyed using that? Like, what are some situations where you've like, that was cool, I'm glad we put it on there?
All of them. Bass, like passive bass, like when you record like a jazz bass or a P bass that's passive. I've got a really, I would run that through the launcher. It's really cool. Backup vocals seem to be really cool with that. If I'm recording very soft kind of guitars with a ribbon mic away from the cab, that works really well. So oftentimes when I'm doing vocals, I'll just kind of A/B the launcher and the cloud lifter if I'm using an SM7 or something like that.
How would you do the A/B? Does it have a bypass switch as well?
Oh no, I never like I use the cloud lifter just to match the gain, right? Because when you do vocals through an SM, like through a dynamic mic, you usually use some kind of an activator before that, right? So I'll do a little pass with the cloud lifter or a FET head or something like that, and then I'll do a pass with the launcher and see if I like that color on this vocalist or not. If again, assuming I have the time to do it.
So the Soyuz gives you the color and the 25 dB of gain.
Yep.
And then when you're going to compare it to a clean version, you use the cloud lifter, which gives you the clean 25 dB of gain. Is that how I'm thinking about it? Okay, cool. All right. So now how about sharing a favorite hardware tool, something you physical that you like to have around the studio while you're doing a record?
I've got a bunch. I'll go with my Juice Box DI. It's like a Motown style DI. I got it off of Reverb. It's basically has a 1960s triad transformer that's wired down, kind of like a Wolf Box, like something that we'd use in Motown, during Motown. It's a dude from Baltimore. Honeywave is the name of his company. It's a DI that just adds this low end glow to whatever you plug into it. So obviously bass, like I love running bass through it. It's like my secret weapon for bass. You just plug it in, go to a preamp, and even before you did anything, it just sounds fantastic. I A/B'd it with just a bunch of other passive DIs, and it's night and day, like really night and day. Dr. Wolfram knew what he was doing when he designed this idea. I run some like jazz guitars through it. Like if I've got like a semi hollow body or a hollow body, I'll run it through it, and it sounds fantastic. If you're using like funk guitars, like chugging like 16th notes, you want to get this kind of like R&B sound. It's just run it through a compressor, and you're good. Print it.
That's cool. I like that kind of stuff. And the reminder of the jazz guitar tone. I've just been listening to a lot more of that and playing more of that style, and it's like you just want a single clean note to have this warm richness to it. And so things that bring that out and make the guitar feel full, just playing a single clean note is pretty cool.
Absolutely. Listen to Midnight Blue by Kenny Burrell. The guitar tones on that are just, they sound really simple, but I don't know, something about it is just, wow. Like whatever they did on that record.
All right. How about sharing a favorite software tool, something exciting that's digital?
So I've been using a plugin called a Talkback Limiter by Cornef Audio lately. It's just gnarly. It mimics like the Talkback Limiter they had in the SSL consoles. Don't quote, I think it was the 4000E. Don't quote me on those, but it's kind of like the Hugh Padgham, Phil Collins thing. It's just like an over the top 100-to-1 limiter. It's crazy distorted. It's just not unlike, it just doesn't sound like anything else. It just crazy over the top. I usually use it in parallel with something, so like a bass or a vocal or a drum kit, and it just it's so cool. It's all over that Lipstick record, by the way. Actually, very I think cool. It's probably all over all these records, but as kind of a drum parallel bus, or even like a kick snare parallel bus, or just like blended a little bit on top of the drum bus. It has a blend knob like built into it. And you can also get in there and kind of tweak the distortion circuit to get more or less of it. It's a super affordable plugin. Like it's a few $dozen, and it's just fantastic. Cornef Audio Talkback Limiter. Shout out to them, by the way.
Okay, cool. Cornef Audio. I gotta check that one out.
KORNEFF.
I'm going to check that out. I'm writing it down. Hashtag Cornef Audio Rockstars. Okay, cool. And then I guess just another question about that. The talkbacks, I think about that as a crazy limiter. I think that's an appropriate way to think about a plugin like that. Would you blend that in as a parallel along, like, let's say you're also doing like a 1176 or DBX 160 kind of parallel compression on kick and snare. You might also sneak in a little bit of this talkback one, or did you find yourself sneaking this in and that's all you needed? It was good to go.
It depends on the music. Usually it's alongside some other stuff. Like I use a lot of parallel processing when I mix. So sometimes it can be like a parallel going into the main drum bus, and then on top of the main drum bus that also includes the parallel, throw in a little bit of that talkback limiter. It really depends on what I'm trying to do. I'll put it, it's very much a crazy kind of sound. So I use it sparingly. I use it a little bit. Where it is on the chain depends on what I'm working on, but it's usually, more often than not, it's in conjunction with other stuff that I work on. And I also print compression to tape. Like all my kicks and snares run through a DBX 160 XT from the 80s. Just a phenomenal compressor. So nice. the tones are already kind of baked in and compressed and all that good stuff. So it's not like I feed a clean drum kit and just use the Corniff audio and that's it. Like the talkback limiter just, solves it.
Now, you're talking about tracking drums and capturing that DBX 160, the parallel compression in real time while you're tracking the drums?
Non-parallel whatsoever. It's on there. It's not parallel at all.
Oh, on the kick and snare.
Absolutely. I distort my 1073 a little bit, like get a little bit of hair, run it through the DBX 160 and print it to Pro Tools.
But I thought you said you got rid of all the dog hair that was in the outlets in the studio.
Yeah, most of it. I kept a little bit,
All right, now give us one more tip for the business side of doing this stuff, because you've done obviously a great job. We didn't get to really circle back on it much, but I'm sure that keeping all these people working together, collaborating with Google folders, you've got schedules you got to organize, you've got payments you got to organize. What do you want to share with the rock stars about smart stuff you learned about keeping a team in communication together and happy?
For sure. Well, about the happy is not really about resources. It's a really good tip I got about business is always pay your people first and yourself second. Like make sure that everyone gets paid. Never, mess around with that, and make sure that take care of your people before you take care of yourself. Like always.
Yeah.
And I've lived by that. A really cool software tool that we use is called Gemelius. I believe it's a Swiss company. It's a solution that we use Google Workspace or the fancy corporate Gmail at work. It basically lets you do a few things. So one, it lets you do it acts as a ticketing software. So we have a bunch of these email addresses like contact @ or hello @ or support @ or all these different email addresses. So it all comes into one place, and then we can ticket it. So someone asks a very specific thing about recording. So my studio coordinator will ping me on that and ticket it to me and say, hey, like this is above my pay grade. Like, can you help these guys out? Or I'll get some kind of email, say, Lid Shah responded to the chat bot on the website, and I can always tag my studio coordinator or one of the other folks and say, hey, I'm doing this podcast with Lid today. Please file that under whatever, right? And this is it's there, like it's always there to the right, like this little pane on the right, so you can go through this entire email chain and everyone knows what they need to do. So, for example, when I'm working on a project, like I send up a production plan. Hey, day 1 is this, day 2 is this, day 3 is this. I'll tag my studio coordinator and say, hey, following this correspondence, please make sure that you book this drummer, book this bass player. I need to book the studio based on this, get the deposit here. And we get to communicate in all these different, it's a great collaboration tool. It's just fantastic.
So how do you spell that?
Gemelius, Gemelius. There are a bunch of other packages kind of like that, but because it's built into the system that we use every day, it just makes it really, really easy to handle everyday tasks and just collaborate. Sometimes 3 different people are collaborating on just one email thread, and rather than copying everyone, people keep dropping people. You know what? And we get to have this internal correspondence regardless of the client or the person that we're dealing with, right?
That's great, and that just integrates right with Google. Yep. So we use G Suite as well. Yep. And I'm always looking for ways to, up the ante on how we're organizing things.
Highly recommended.
Very cool. Rockstars, I will add to this because I've like Jacob, I've seen a lot of things come and go, and things are coming so fast these days too. Don't feel like you're looking for the one right answer when it comes to tech tools and organizing. There are as many ways to do this as you can imagine. And really, I think what's key, it's like what Jacob said about coming up with your own system of organizing. You just need to you explore them until you find something that works, and then just relax. Like you've got something that works. You don't need to stress about it every day, and you don't need to switch tools all the time either. Just like plugins.
Fix it in pre-production, right? Do your research, right? Figure out something that works for you and then just roll with it, right? You don't have to, if it works, you don't have to question it all the time.
Okay, groovy. Now I'm going to go to the way back, the final question. This is the hypothetical one. We're going to take the Wayback Studio machine, and you are going to go back in time and find young Jacob who's playing guitar, and you're like, hey, what do you want, man? I'm busy, dude. I got 3 gigs in the next 5 seconds. So what do you need? And then you say, listen, man, I've come back in time to give you this one bit of advice. Here I am, older, wiser Jacob, and I want to tell you, this is the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of the studio yourself one day. What advice would you like to go back and give yourself if you could?
So this advice applies to anything that you want to pursue in life, but it definitely applies to music and recording and being a rock star. There are only 3 things you need to make sure that you have or that you do to become successful. The first of which is be very good at what you do and just keep hammering at it, right? If you want to be a carpenter, just keep getting better at it. Keep working on it. What do you want to be, a lawyer? You want to be a recording engineer? You want to be a guitarist? Like whatever it is you do, just be very good at what you do and keep hammering. Like never settle for the level that you're at. The second thing you got to do is treat people well. Like you want to be the kind of person that people want to work with and be around. If you're not going to be that person, if you're obnoxious to people, if you're always, I don't know, like have BO, like if you're just not a person that people want to be around, you're not going to be able to succeed. And then the third thing you need is luck. And what I mean by luck is not like, for the skies to open. You need to put yourself in a situation where you can get lucky, right? If you're in a town that doesn't have a music scene, go to a different town. If you're in a town that has a music scene, put yourself out there. Like it's about putting yourself in a situation where lightning can strike and you can be lucky. And if you follow all 3, so be good at what you do, treat people well, and put yourself in a situation where you can get lucky, there is no way in hell that you're going to fail.
Yeah. I like that analogy. It's like put yourself where luck can find you. It can actually
Exactly
find you, Imagine luck can't get around that well and needs you to be nearby. Very cool, dude. I love that. That's good. Those are great tips. You're also a fantastic guest, man, and you've got a really great way with words. And
let it really get you everywhere.
Yeah, this has been a lot of fun, and I'm sure the rock stars appreciate all the wisdom that you've shared. So let the rock stars know, where can they go find you online if they're ready to maybe they just want to take music lessons. Maybe they just need an engineer to push buttons. Maybe they need somebody who's really going to step in and want to help them produce their songs. Maybe they just need a coach for, figuring out how to make a better studio themselves. Where would you like them to find you when they're ready to make their next hit record or studio?
Well, I'm available, so feel free to email me. My email address is jacob@moderntonestudios.com. I'm happy to talk to anyone, right? If there's anyone I can help, it might take me a day or 2 to get back to you, but I promise I'll get back to you. ModernTonestudios.com is our website. There's tons of information. Like you said, there's pictures of everyone. There's a profile video for each of the musicians that work here. So whether you're looking for lessons or recording or whatever, you can check out a video of a person talking about their journey and kind of getting a sense of who they are before you start working with them. We do both in-person and remote lessons. We have a robust remote schedule. So if you're not in the Bay Area and you want to get some lessons, hit us up at moderntonestudios.com. ModernTone Studios on Instagram. We try to be active with that. Some months we're better than others, but for the most part, we try to share cool tips or just photos and videos from sessions and just try to be active with that. We also have a Facebook account. It's ModernTone Studios. And yeah, probably recordingstudiorockstars.com.
Yeah, that's right, man. That's right. Your episode will be out there. Awesome, dude. Well, thank you so much for hanging with us. A pleasure as always. Hopefully, maybe I'll see you again soon, although I don't need to date this interview too much. But hopefully I'll see you at the next NAMM, AES, whatever it is, and we'll hang out poolside and have another beer or coffee and talk about studio life.
Dude, it's been amazing, and it was went by so fast. Thank you so much for this.
Yeah, thank you very much for listening, rock stars. We owe it all to you guys and girls, and just thank you for listening. This is what it's all about. Jacob, you rock, man. Look forward to seeing you around the studio, and I look forward to coming to Lafayette and seeing ModernTone.
You should, man. Be well. I can't wait to have you.
All right, man. Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our awesome sponsors who help make this episode possible: OWC, Lewitt, Atom Audio, Isotope, and Spectra 1964. And remember, at isotope.com/rockstars, use the coupon code ROCK10 for 10% off any plugin purchase. If you enjoyed Recording Studio Rockstars, then please check out our sponsors using the link in our show notes, because it's a great way to help support this show. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio. They're going to help you make your best record ever. I would also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars, Vlad Weselchenko and Braden Stremming, for additional podcasts and video production. Thanks so much for listening, Rockstars, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.